Chapter 8:13. After leaving Li Jiandong's home, Lu Feier had been in a state of excitement. As she drove, she pulled Xueqi and chattered. Hey Sister Chow, how do you think those two guys died? According to Li Jiandong, the police finally concluded that it was suicide. How could it be possible? They fell in that place and they fell so badly. How could it be suicide? It's funny. Lu Feier spoke quickly, but there was no response from the side. She turned her head and saw Xueqi sitting in the passenger seat. Her head was tilted to one side, and her eyes were twinkling as she looked at the street scene passing by quickly outside the car. Although it was late at night, the lighting project of the Tiannan municipal government still made the city look like a city that never sleeps. In the forest of steel and mud, there were bright neon lights everywhere. Although there were few people and vehicles on the street, under the bright lights, the city still exuded the bustling atmosphere of a modern city. Lu Feier saw that although Xueqi's face was tilted, she could still see many complicated eyes flowing in the corners of Xueqi's eyes. Her eyes were full of vicissitudes of life, dazzling and bizarre. Lu Feier was very puzzled. She couldn't help asking Sister Chow, "What's wrong with you?" Then, she smiled ambiguously and said, "Are you reluctant to part with your little enemy?" If Lu Feier had joked with Xueqi like this in normal times, Xueqi would have been angry and laughed with her. Lu Feier was even ready. She turned her body and was ready to dodge Xueqi. She opened her mouth and shouted at any time, "I'm driving. Don't make trouble." But Lu Feier soon found that Xueqi was sitting in her seat very quietly, motionless. Only the corner of her mouth was slightly pulled, showing a meaningful and extremely complicated smile. Humph. Little enemy? Little? Perhaps he's still young in this life, but he's really an enemy. At this moment, the memory of the mystical silver fox flashed through her mind like a lantern. She had entered Mount Wutai to secretly learn the Vajra Buddha Dharma, but because of the lack of Yuanyang Qi in her body, she couldn't stand the fierce attack of the Vajra Buddha Dharma. She almost died of Qi deviation. If it weren't for the passing Zen master Xueqi who saved her, she would not have the prestige of the mystical silver fox in the future. Xueqi was the first man that the mystical silver fox fell in love with, and he was also the last man she fell in love with. This eminent monk of Mount Wutai was handsome and had an extraordinary bearing. He had a profound Buddhist doctrine and a good eloquence. At that time, he was famous in the cultivation world of the Tang dynasty. He had discussed and fought with the great Confucian scholars and great genre of Confucianism and Taoism many times in public. He had never lost and returned with great victories. At that time, his reputation and appearance were not inferior to that of the eminent monk Xuanzang in the period of Emperor Taizong of Tang. In the era when Xueqi was born, it happened to be the end of the Tang dynasty. Most of the emperors believed in Buddhism and suppressed Buddhism. Xueqi's appearance was like a comet that streaked across the sky. It was extremely eye-catching. People in the world said that he was the reincarnation of the living Buddha, and his purpose was to come to the world to promote Buddhism and save the declining Buddhism. In fact, Xueqi was the reincarnation of Manjushri Bodhisattva. He came to the world to save all living beings. Unexpectedly, a peerless genius like the mystical silver fox appeared halfway. She even courted the reincarnation of Manjushri Bodhisattva. As a result, she failed to woo him and was humiliated. The mystical silver fox's love turned into hatred. In her anger, she turned around and killed the reincarnation of Bodhisattva, Xueqi. Manjushri Bodhisattva was the left hand of Buddha, and the Bodhisattva was the Bodhisattva with the highest cultivation level. Among all the Bodhisattvas, the one on the left was the most respected. Therefore, Manjushri Bodhisattva was the head of the 8 great Bodhisattvas, and his status was not lower than that of the 5 great wisdom kings. However, the Bodhisattva did the work of purifying all living beings, while the wisdom king did the work of fighting and PK. It could be said that one was a civil position, while the other was a military position. Manjushri Bodhisattva was the head of the civil officials under the Buddha. Although he could fight and PK, he was not a professional after all. When the mystical silver fox stole the secrets of heaven and understood the truth of Buddhism and Taoism, the reincarnation of Manjushri Bodhisattva was undoubtedly killed by the mystical silver fox. When the news reached the heaven court, the heaven realm was shocked and the Buddha was furious. What? My most obedient little brother was killed by a 9-tailed fox? Before Manjushri Bodhisattva became a Buddha, he had been following the Buddha, helping the Buddha to promote the Dharma and teach all living beings. Now, It was not easy for him to make a name for himself and descend to the mortal world to have some incense. Now, it was not easy for him to be reincarnated, but he was killed. Even though the Buddha was calm, he couldn't help but fly into a rage. He immediately let his incarnation, the immovable Wisdom King, go straight to the South Heaven and descend to the mortal world to be reincarnated. For no other reason than to take revenge and support his little brother. Perhaps it was because of his good fortune that the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King didn't open his heavenly eye and body root until he was 18 years old. He had just started cultivating for a month when he ran into the mystical silver fox. By chance, the two fought fiercely. At this time, how could the reincarnated Wisdom King be a match for the mystical silver fox? He was knocked to the ground by the mystical silver fox in a few moves. But since he was the reincarnation of the Wisdom King and the incarnation of the living Buddha, the reincarnation of the Wisdom King naturally knew the truth of being flexible. The divine dragon could soar above the 9th heaven, and it could also hide under the 9th earth. The living Buddha had been a beggar in the past. Why couldn't he beg for mercy? Therefore, the immovable Wisdom King endured humiliation and begged for mercy. However, the reincarnation of the Wisdom King in this life looked exactly the same as Xueqi. He had red cheeks and white teeth, and was extraordinarily handsome. When the mystical silver fox looked at the reincarnation of the Wisdom King, she was moved. Her heart, which had thought that it was as dry as dead ashes, began to ripple again. At that time she thought, if Xueqi, this enemy, begged me for mercy like this, I would not humiliate him in public. If he had agreed to my love at that time, wouldn't it be a joy for me to live with him? The mystical silver fox was moved. Finally, she let go of the reincarnation of the Wisdom King and took him with her. In the past, her infatuation with Xueqi had been transferred to the reincarnation of the Wisdom King, who looked exactly like Xueqi. She tried to change his mind with her true feelings. But what she had never expected was that the reincarnation of the Wisdom King had pretended to be a snake. After a few years of hard work, he suddenly seized the time when she was practicing the 9th realm of the heavenly Jindan technique and launched a fierce attack on her with all the masters in the cultivation world. Finally, the mystical silver fox, who was invincible in the world, was scared out of her wits. Her body was destroyed, and her young spirit fled to the east in embarrassment. After this matter, the mystical silver fox naturally hated the immovable Wisdom King to the bone. If she hadn't been hiding in Mount Wutai and Mount Mao, she would have immediately rushed forward to fight with Li Yundong, the immovable Wisdom King of this life, when she saw him. After all, the mystical silver fox was not an ordinary person. She could hold back her monstrous hatred and pretend to be Xueqi without any flaws. It was not until she got in the car with Lu Feier alone that she began to show her feelings slightly. Looking at everything around her, the mystical silver fox felt that the world was extremely strange. She had been sealed for nearly 1,000 years, and everything had changed greatly. It could be said that the sea had changed into mulberry fields, and everything had changed dramatically. But the only thing that had not changed was the 1,000-year feud between her and the immovable Wisdom King. The mystical silver fox leaned her elbow on the window and her head on her palm. The smile on the corner of her mouth became more and more playful. She said in a low voice, "Immovable Wisdom King, I didn't expect that you were in front of me when my soul was scattered by you. Now I open my eyes again, and you are in front of me again. The two of us are really fated." Lu Feier, who was driving, heard her muttering to herself, but she couldn't hear clearly what she was saying. She couldn't help turning her head and asking, "Sister Chow, what did you say?" The mystical silver fox smiled and looked out of the car. She pointed with her finger and said, "I said, you are going to kill someone soon." Lu Feier looked in the direction of her finger and was shocked. She saw a person standing on the empty road, and her car quickly crashed into this person. Because of the night driving, there were almost no people or cars on the road, so Lu Feier's speed was extremely fast, as if she was driving on the highway. Suddenly seeing a person in front of her, Lu Feier was shocked. She subconsciously stepped on the brake and then turned the steering wheel. At this moment, the tires of the car made a terrible squeaking sound, and bursts of smoke rose from the violent friction between the rubber tires and the asphalt road. Little by little, the figure reflected in Lu Feier's pupils was getting closer and bigger in front of her eyes. She could clearly see that the figure was graceful and slim. It was obviously a woman. In the next second, the car was a little closer to the person. She clearly recognized that this person was none other than Ao Wushuang. It's her. Why is she here? This thought flashed quickly in Lu Feier's mind, and she became more and more shocked. But what happened in the next second caused Lu Feier to be shocked to the core. She saw a 3-feet-long Qing Feng sword appear in front of Ao Wushuang in an instant. The long sword suddenly turned into a rolling iron lotus. Each petal of the lotus was like a sharp blade. The blades flowed and rotated quickly, like a meat grinder. The clanging sound could be heard clearly even through the closed car. It was so terrible that it made people's hair stand on end. Lu Feier watched helplessly as the rolling iron lotus platform, like a terrifying cutting machine, crushed the front of the car bit by bit. For a moment, countless fragments splashed everywhere, and she and the mystical silver fox in the passenger seat also stepped into this terrible cutting abyss bit by bit. At this time, Lu Feier's mind was blank. What was happening in front of her was completely beyond her range of acceptance and imagination. She didn't understand why Ao Wushuang wanted to do such a cruel thing to her. She didn't understand what the terrible iron lotus in front of her was. What Lu Feier didn't know was that Ao Wushuang didn't care about women like Li Yundong. She only cared about 2 people. One was Wang Yuanshan, and the other was her disciple Su Chan. Even Li Yundong cared about her because he loved her. As for the others, hey, even if they were all dead, it had nothing to do with her, let alone Lu Feier. As for whether killing Lu Feier would cause her to suffer divine punishment, Ao Wushuang couldn't care less at this time. In front of the mystical silver fox, she had to kill her with one blow. If she was still hesitant, there would be endless troubles in the future. In her opinion, the mystical silver fox was much more terrible than the divine punishment. In order to chase after the mystical silver fox, Ao Wushuang specially asked Li Yundong for the Bahuang sword before she went out. This sword turned out to be her sword. Although she had already given it to Li Yundong, she wanted to borrow it now. Although Li Yundong didn't know why she wanted the Bahuang sword at this time, there was no reason not to give it to her because of her feelings. Ao Wushuang didn't explain much. After getting the Bahuang sword, she immediately went out of her body with Yang's spirit and followed the mystical silver fox and Lu Feier. It was not easy for her to wait until the 2 of them came to a sparsely populated place. She suddenly appeared and wanted to kill them together. Her attack seemed slow, but it was as fast as lightning. In the blink of an eye, the rolling iron lotus had already rushed in front of the mystical silver fox and Lu Feier. Every sharp iron lotus leaf transformed from the Bahuang sword made a buzzing sound, like the roars and howls from hell. Chapter 8:14. Just as Ao Wushuang's Bahuang sword was about to turn Lu Feier and the mystical silver fox into mud in the next second, a strange light suddenly flashed in the mystical silver fox's eyes. She suddenly shouted and put her right hand on the window above her head. With a bang, the roof of the car was blown away and a huge skylight was opened. At the same time, she grabbed Lu Feier's arm with her left hand, jumped up, and jumped out of the car with her. With a buzzing sound, the Bahuang sword blasted towards the mystical silver fox like a cannonball. The mystical silver fox was furious and shouted, "How dare you! You're courting death!" She raised her hand, and her fingers fluttered like a blooming lotus flower. Each finger accurately flicked on the revolving steel lotus leaves of the lotus platform. In Lu Feier's opinion, every rotating lotus leaf was as fast as an afterimage. Not to mention flicking it with her fingers, she couldn't even see it clearly with her eyes. If she stretched out her hand to flick it, she was afraid that her hand would be twisted out of sight as soon as she stretched out her hand. However, the mystical silver fox next to her was able to accurately hit the lotus leaf of the Bahuang sword with exquisite strength and skill and bounced it away. The edge of the lotus leaf was extremely sharp, and the Bahuang sword was known to be invincible. At this time, the mystical silver fox's spiritual energy was far from recovering, so she naturally did not dare to take it head-on. She could only use her delicate skills to resist this powerful magic weapon. However, the mystical silver fox was a peerless fox demon who had lived for more than 1,000 years. The number of times she had fought was much more than the number of times a 90-year-old man had eaten. In today's world, in terms of the subtlety of fighting skills and the experience of adapting to the situation, the mystical silver fox was definitely unparalleled in the world. No one could beat her. Ao Wushuang saw that she had 5 fingers on one hand, flying up and down as fast as an afterimage. She could only hear a dense clanging sound. However, no matter how the iron lotus seat rolled, it could not move an inch in front of the mystical silver fox. Ao Wushuang didn't even dare to think about such a scene. If someone else waved a sharp sword and slashed at her, Ao Wushuang was naturally confident that she could flick the opponent's sword with a flick of her finger and block the opponent's attack. But this was an iron lotus throne transformed from the Bahuang's sword. Every second, at least 10 iron lotus leaves could be seen spinning rapidly. Moreover, in this space of less than a square meter, there were at least 1,000 iron lotus leaves spinning rapidly. Although it was impossible for these thousands of lotus leaves to attack the mystical silver fox at the same time, it was at least equivalent to 10 top experts waving sharp swords to attack the mystical silver fox. For Ao Wushuang, she could block one, but it would be very difficult for her to block two. If it was 3, she would just run away. But 10? Ao Wushuang was shocked and thought to herself, the mystical silver fox really deserves its reputation. At this time, her cultivation had not yet recovered, but her exquisite fighting skills were already shocking. Even Li Yundong was not as good as her. Ao Wushuang immediately stopped thinking about it. Without saying a word, she turned around and ran. After the Bahuang's sword was bounced off by the mystical silver fox, it turned into a cyan light with a clang and chased after Ao Wushuang. The mystical silver fox sneered and said, "Want to run? It's not that easy." She held Lu Feier, who had been stunned for a long time, in one hand and quickly chased after her. Although Ao Wushuang was fast, the mystical silver fox behind her was still able to follow her closely with a living person in her hand, which made her more and more shocked. In the silence of the night, a few cars would occasionally pass by on the spacious road. However, none of these drivers noticed that above their heads, there were 2 peerlessly beautiful fox demons, one in front and one behind. At this moment, if someone were to look up at the sky, they would be able to vaguely see 2 indistinct green lights in the sky like meteors. Ao Wushuang ran for a while and found that she could not get rid of the mystical silver fox no matter what. She sighed in her heart and said in despair, "Forget it. I'll die here today." It's incredible that the mystical silver fox can resist the Bahuang's sword with her body alone. I'm definitely no match for her. Yuan Shan, see you in my next life. As soon as this thought flashed through Ao Wushuang's mind, a flash of inspiration suddenly flashed through her mind. She seemed to think of something and said in her heart, "No, why did the mystical silver fox take the risk of being crushed and block the Bahuang's sword with her body?" She knew that if the mystical silver fox's spiritual energy had recovered to a certain level, she would definitely block the Bahuang's sword with her golden body instead of risking her body. Ao Wushuang thought to herself, could it be? Ao Wushuang's heart skipped a beat. She reached into her bosom and took out a talisman. Although she was a young spirit, she had brought almost all the powerful magical weapons and talismans that she could carry. This talisman was not an ordinary Taoist talisman. It was the divine thunder talisman of the 5 thunders spell that Su Chan had given to Li Yundong. The talisman paper was dark yellow, and there were 4 murderous ancient seal characters on it. Heavenly thunder punishes evil. There were originally 3 talismans, which had been passed on by Wang Yuanshan to Ao Wushuang. After Ao Wushuang had stolen the Renyuan Jindan, she had given it to Su Chan so that she could escape. She had also given her 2 talismans to protect herself. Su Chan, on the other hand, cared about her lover, so she had given him a priceless thunder talisman. Although this talisman recorded the 5 thunder spell, because it was made by Zhang Tianshi of the Zhengyi school, its power was far greater than that of ordinary heavenly thunder talismans. It was also known as the Celestial Master Talisman, and its power was incredible. At this time, if she could let the Bahuang's sword entangle the mystical silver fox for a while, and then use the Celestial Master Talisman to attack her, she might be able to turn defeat into victory and defeat the strong. Thinking of this, Ao Wushuang had an idea and flew toward the deserted wilderness with the mystical silver fox. After flying for a while, she gradually left Tiannan City and came to the suburbs. She looked around. With the help of the moonlight, she could see that there were weeds everywhere, and there was a huge deep pit on the side of the road. She was surprised to recognize that the place where she was clearly the place where Li Yundong had struck He Shao by thunder before. It was here that the young boy angrily attracted the thunder and killed He Shao, who was angered by both men and gods, and finally set foot on the road of cultivation. Now she had accidentally escaped here again. Could it be that it was predestined? Ao Wushuang was surprised, but she didn't have time to think about the coincidence. Her body quickly fell, her fingers hidden in front of her body, and she quickly pinched her fingers. She stepped on the 7 star steps and quickly set up a formation on the ground. The mystical silver fox quickly followed. She only took a look and landed with Lu Feier fearlessly. She sneered and said, You still want to set up a formation? What kind of formation do you want to set up by yourself? Humph. I think you are still an honest man. Why did you attack me? Did someone instruct you? Or... As she was speaking, she suddenly noticed that a stream of white qi was gradually condensing on the top of Ao Wushuang's head. The white qi steamed out of the Bai Hui Shui on the top of her head and rushed straight into the sky like a beacon of smoke. In an instant, there was a thunderclap in the sky. With a loud rumble, the sky was almost shattered. The mystical silver fox's face changed dramatically. At this time, she had not undergone the thunder retribution. Although she was not afraid of the thunder retribution, the heavenly thunder was not the same as the heavenly thunder when she was undergoing the thunder retribution. It was still late winter, and the heavenly thunder in winter had no vitality at all. If she was struck by it, she could not absorb any power of heaven and earth. There was only damage, but no nourishment. The mystical silver fox suddenly raised her head and saw that the dark clouds above her head were rolling and rotating, converging into a huge vortex in the middle. In the center of the vortex, thunder and lightning were increasing, and an extremely powerful force was constantly gathering in it. The mystical silver fox was shocked and angry. She moved and was about to leave, but she saw the Bahuang pouncing on her like crazy, blocking all her escape angles and directions. At this moment, Ao Wushuang's Xueqi surged all over her body, and the runes on the heavenly thunder talisman in her hand suddenly emitted a dazzling light. She only felt a surging force coming from her hand and going straight to the top of her head. Ao Wushuang pointed to the sky with one hand. The sky seemed to sense her mind and this force, and made a loud bang. Ao Wushuang then pointed to the mystical silver fox with this hand. Her black hair rose to the sky, and she shouted, "Heavenly thunder! Kill evil!" In this quiet and cold wilderness, an incomparably powerful heavenly thunder suddenly fell from the sky, fiercely striking toward the body of the #1 demon fox in the Chinese cultivation world since ancient times. Chapter 8:15. The power of the Taoist Master Talisman depended not only on the talisman itself, but also on the caster himself. The power of the talisman was somewhat similar to the 3 secrets in one advocated by Tang Mi. However, Tang Mi's magic depended on the secret mouth, secret heart, and secret finger, and the power of the talisman depended on the talisman, visualization, and the cultivation of the cultivator himself. Before Li Jiandong had reached the Zhuji phase, a bolt of heavenly thunder was enough to make a deep pit on the ground. At this time, the heavenly thunder that Ao Wushuang had attracted with her own spiritual power as a medium was really terrifying. The mystical silver fox looked up and saw a green light coming down from the top of her head. At this moment, the pupils in the eyes of the mystical silver fox instantly shrank. She finally let go of Lu Feier's hand and pinched her fingers together quickly. Xueqi suddenly gushed out of her whole body, and a 9-tailed young spirit of the mystical silver fox appeared above her head in an instant. The 9-tailed celestial fox was the young spirit of the mystical silver fox. 7 of her 9 tails were golden and 2 were white, which also showed that her current strength had not yet recovered to the real realm of the 9-tailed celestial fox. Once all her 9 tails turned golden, it meant that the peerless demon fox, who had almost swept the cultivation world of China more than 1,000 years ago, would reappear in the world. The 9-tailed young spirit of the mystical silver fox almost curled up into a ball in mid-air, trying to reduce the area struck by the heavenly thunder as much as possible. At the same time, her body rolled rapidly, and her 9 tails were like huge waves, constantly surging like turbulent water. At the moment when the heavenly thunder struck her, the mystical silver fox's rolling movement suddenly accelerated. As soon as the heavenly thunder touched her body, it was taken to the side by her high-speed rotation speed. With a loud bang, the heavenly thunder suddenly passed by the side of the mystical silver fox and hit the ground like a cannonball. In an instant, a deep pit was blasted out. Gravel flew everywhere and smoke filled the air. Although the mystical silver fox relied on her unparalleled fighting experience to escape this attack, her young spirit was almost smashed. Even Lu Feier could see that the body of the 9-tailed celestial fox in the air was trembling slightly, as if it would break at any time. When Ao Wushuang saw this, she immediately pinched her fingers and activated the 5 thunder spell that Wang Yuanshan had taught her. Originally, women could not practice the art of thunder. They could only control electricity, not thunder. However, Ao Wushuang had exchanged yang qi with Wang Yuanshan, so she was one of the rare female cultivators in the world who could control thunder. Learn. She chanted an incantation and visualized lightning in her mind. She pinched her fingers together and soon, another bolt of lightning struck down from the sky. However, the power of this heavenly thunder was far inferior to that of the heavenly thunder attracted by the Taoist master talisman. But now that the mystical silver fox had been struck by the heavenly thunder, Ao Wushuang wanted to take advantage of your illness to kill you. While the mystical silver fox could not recover, a few more bolts of heavenly thunder would come. It would be best if she could destroy her young spirit. Then she would have a chance to win. However, the mystical silver fox was the mystical silver fox after all. She was a big devil who could still beat all the cultivators in Japan and make them cry for their parents. Seeing that Ao Wushuang was unforgiving and had even cast a spell to attract the heavenly thunder, she was furious. I haven't been in the world for 1,000 years. When I come out again, someone dares to be so arrogant in front of me. Ao Wushuang couldn't help laughing angrily. Her 9-tailed young spirit stopped in an instant, and her 7 golden tails swung at the falling heavenly thunder. With a few booming sounds, the heavenly thunder was blasted away in all directions and splashed on the mountains in the wilderness, causing bursts of fire in all directions. This seemed simple, but without extremely accurate judgment, it was absolutely impossible to do it. Ao Wushuang was horrified. She had blocked a day's thunder in this way. This was really terrible. She was shocked by the amazing fighting strength of the mystical silver fox. This was an extremely strong opponent. In terms of pure strength, Ao Wushuang was not far from the mystical silver fox. Moreover, she could show her fox demon body and entangle with the mystical silver fox, who could not show her real body. Once the fox demon showed its real body, its strength would at least double. This was why Ao Wushuang dared to fight Lu Yi, who was in the Thunder Retribution realm, when she showed her real body in Mount Qingqing. Once a fox demon cultivates to the 7-tailed stage, its thick hide would be immune to the majority of spells. Moreover, ordinary swords and magic treasures would find it hard to injure it. It could be said that as long as it revealed its fox demon form, the fox demon's body would have an additional layer of little golden body. Once it cultivates to the realm of an 8-tailed earth fox and reveals its fox demon form, practically no spells under the heavens would be able to injure it. Only a few magic treasures and a few magic arrays could wound it. Even if it was besieged, the 8-tailed earth fox could rely on its thick hide to defend and charge forward. If it cultivated to the level of the 9-tailed celestial fox, it would really reach an unimaginable realm. If people blocked it, it would kill it. If Buddha blocked it, it would kill Buddha. However, the mystical silver fox was a typical top master who could use 1% of her strength as 100% of her strength. She was a monster who could use 7 tails to fight 8 tails and 8 tails to fight 9 tails. Ao Wushuang even felt that even if the mystical silver fox was only in the Yongshan phase, she might even be able to defeat a Jinshin master. Ao Wushuang knew that the cultivation world generally believed that 10 young spirits could not defeat a Jinshin, but the mystical silver fox must be an exception. The reason was very simple, because she was the mystical silver fox. At this moment, Ao Wushuang's fighting spirit completely disappeared. She instantly had the idea of escaping. But if she ran away like this, she would die. Ao Wushuang thought of something and immediately controlled the Bahuang sword to attack the mystical silver fox. Meanwhile, she quickly fled in the opposite direction. The mystical silver fox laughed angrily and said, "You want to leave? In your dreams." Her 10 fingers flew, and the sound of clanging rang out quickly. The Bahuang sword was bounced away. Her figure was as fast as lightning, and she chased after the back of Ao Wushuang's head. She slapped down hard with her palm. Ao Wushuang only heard a fierce palm wind coming from behind her. Her heart trembled, and she knew that whether she would live or die was at this moment. In an instant, Ao Wushuang let out a shrill howl, and countless slender white hairs quickly grew out of her body. In an instant, she turned into a 7-tailed divine fox. She jumped forward and barely avoided the back of her head, which was about to hit her vital part. She took the blow with her back. At the same time, she turned around and opened her bloody mouth. With a wild roar, she bit at the mystical silver fox. As the saying goes, a cornered dog jumps over a wall and a rabbit bites a man in a hurry. What's more, the 7-tailed divine fox went crazy and fought with her life. Ao Wushuang's counterbite was so fast that it was almost synchronized with the mystical silver fox's palm on her body. As soon as the mystical silver fox's palm arrived, her bite had already arrived. The mystical silver fox's heart skipped a beat. With a sneer, She exerted her strength and slapped Ao Wushuang's body with a muffled sound. Her body fell down. Ao Wushuang's body sank. She turned around and bit the mystical silver fox. Naturally, her sharp teeth brushed past the mystical silver fox's body. Ao Wushuang let out a muffled groan. At the moment when her body fell, the 7 huge tails swept fiercely. With a bang, they swept the mystical silver fox's body. The mystical silver fox blocked with both hands and flew backward like a cloth bag in an instant. Her body flew far away before she stopped abruptly. But when she stabilized her body, Ao Wushuang had disappeared. She didn't know where she had escaped to, and the Bahuang sword had also disappeared. The mystical silver fox couldn't help laughing angrily. Well, what a 7-tailed divine fox. Since I've been in charge of the Fox Zen men, this is the first time I've seen such a powerful fox demon. What a pity, what a pity. The mystical silver fox looked at the place where Ao Wushuang had disappeared. Her eyes flickered, as if she was thinking about something. After a while, she turned around and looked at Lu Feier beside her. At this time, Lu Feier was already scared stiff. She subconsciously wanted to faint, but her mind was very clear. Although she was scared to death, she was even more afraid that once she fainted, she was afraid that she would never wake up again. Lu Feier had acted in many movies and TV shows, but none of them could compare with the scene in front of her. Just now, the fight between the man and the fox was earth-shattering, and thunder was everywhere. Even the computer special effects were not so dazzling. Lu Feier watched the mystical silver fox walk slowly toward her, and her whole body trembled uncontrollably. She was very familiar with the appearance of the woman in front of her, but her temperament and eyes at this time made her feel very strange. Who the hell are you? What did you do to Sister Chow? When the mystical silver fox stood still in front of her, Lu Feier finally couldn't help shouting loudly. The mystical silver fox looked at her coldly and smiled faintly. Sister Chow? Do you mean the original owner of this robe? Hey, let me tell you, she is me and I am her. I am her previous life, and she is my current life. Do you understand what I'm saying? Lu Feier and Xueqi had a very good relationship. An idea suddenly flashed through her heart. I'm afraid that Sister Chow will never recover. I'm afraid that she is already dead. She can't come back. Lu Feier couldn't help but burst into tears. She said in a hoarse voice, "Give Sister Chow back to me." The mystical silver fox looked at her coldly and said with a sneer, "You're really impolite to me. Don't you know who I am?" Lu Feier just cried and shook her head subconsciously. The mystical silver fox's eyes narrowed, and she suddenly sighed. 1,000 years ago, even the farmers in the farmland or the children herding cattle in the countryside had heard of my name and knew who I was. But I didn't expect that 1,000 years later, even a famous actress like you, who has seen a lot of things, wouldn't know who I am. Hey! The mystical silver fox's eyes became a little vicissitudes of life. She said faintly, "My name is Mystical Silver Fox. Remember it." After that, she turned over her palm and slapped down on the top of Lu Feier's head. Sorry. There are a lot of things to do. It's even later. There will be another update later. But it's a little late. Don't wait. Chapter 8:16. Lu Feier watched helplessly as the mystical silver fox's palm patted down on her head. She had no doubt that this soft white and slender hand could smash her head into mud without any effort. I didn't expect that I would die in the hands of Sister Chow. Lu Feier sighed in her heart, and a trace of despair flashed in the corner of her eyes. But just as she saw that the mystical silver fox's palm covered her sight and was about to hit her head, the white hand suddenly stopped in front of her face. The mystical silver fox stared at Lu Feier with flickering eyes, and her face seemed to be a little ugly. Her palm trembled slightly, as if it had stopped in mid-air and could not fall. But soon, the mystical silver fox took a deep breath, and her face suddenly turned red on one side, and then quickly turned pale. Within a few breaths, her face changed several times, and then slowly returned to normal. The mystical silver fox smiled and slowly withdrew her hand. She said, her relationship seems to be really good. Hey, forget it. I'll let you go." Lu Feier didn't know that at the moment when the mystical silver fox's palm fell, Xueqi's memory and divine sense caused trouble in the body of the mystical silver fox, which made her movements a little stiff and inconvenient. She thought that the mystical silver fox had let her go because of her good relationship with Xueqi. She was not a bold person, Nor was she a strong person who was not afraid of death. She was just a little girl. How could she not be afraid of death? Now that she had rolled over from the ghost gate and saved her life, Lu Feier suddenly felt as if she had collapsed all over. She could hardly stand. Her awe for the mystical silver fox had reached its peak. She looked at the mystical silver fox timidly and whispered worriedly, "You won't kill me?" "Why?" The mystical silver fox smiled and said, "You will know in the future. Now, come with me." As she spoke, she grabbed Lu Feier with one hand and picked her up like a baby. Her figure flashed and disappeared in an instant. While the mystical silver fox was fighting with Ao Wushuang, in the downtown of Tianan City, Li Yundong was sitting cross-legged in his room alone. He was silently running his qi while thinking about what had happened today. His cultivation had reached the realm of the unity of heaven and man, and he had a natural sensitivity to danger. This was the sixth sense of an ordinary person. However, the sixth sense of ordinary people was like Duan Yu's six meridians divine sword, which sometimes worked, but Li Yundong's premonition was very accurate most of the time. Although Li Yundong didn't know where the danger came from, he could vaguely feel that an inexplicable danger was coming toward him. It was as if he was in the middle of a vast ocean. Although the surface of the sea was still calm, the undercurrent was surging under his feet, and the wind and clouds were surging in the sky. It seemed that the calm sea would be set off in the next second. He really wanted to remind the people around him to pay attention to their safety, but the new year was coming soon. Not only were the little foxes happily preparing for a happy new year, even Zhou Qin and the others, who had always been steady, were looking forward to it and had prepared everything early. The atmosphere around him was peaceful, and there was no sign of a storm coming. Li Yundong didn't want to disturb all this and disturb them from having a good new year. Although the new year in China was getting weaker and weaker, and more people didn't pay attention to the new year, there were still many people who regarded the new year as more important than anything else. No matter how hard it was, they wanted to spend the new year with their families. Li Yundong's parents didn't care about anything. He had been independent since he was a child, and his feelings for his parents were very faint. Now, he regarded the little foxes as his family. They wanted to have a happy new year, so of course, he couldn't be a disappointment. Besides, what was the purpose of a leader? Could it be that he was using it to boss people around and point fingers at his subordinates? Since he had become the leader, he naturally had to shoulder this responsibility. Although Li Yundong now felt that this position was a little unreliable and that Lu Yi was most likely plotting against him behind his back, Li Yundong was a very responsible man. Since he had sat in this position for a day, he had to think about everything and do his duty for a day. He had to silently pick up all these things and not let the pressure be transferred to Su Chan and the little foxes. Thinking of this, Li Yundong sighed silently. Just as he was about to put these annoying things aside, he heard someone knocking on the door softly. Li Yundong smiled slightly. He didn't even need to guess to know who it was. Almost every night these days, the little girl would knock on the door with a very unique rhythm, so that Li Yundong would know that it was her. After a while, the door was pushed open. Sure enough, he saw the little girl poking her head in and looking at him with a smile on her face. In the past few nights, the two little lovers had been very affectionate. It was really uncomfortable to be apart for even a second. Although very unpleasant things had happened during the day and there had been a bizarre murder case at night, after the little girl calmed down a little, she came to find Li Yundong again. Li Yundong smiled and waved to the little girl, motioning for her to come in. The little girl quietly closed the door and came to the bed quietly like a thief. She rolled onto the bed and fell into Li Yundong's arms. The little girl raised her head and looked at Li Yundong's face, only to see that there was a hint of worry in the corners of his eyes. She couldn't help asking, "Yundong, are you still thinking about that case?" Li Yundong stroked her face with a smile and said, "It's not just about that. There are other things." Su Chan thought for a moment, then asked very obediently, "Is it about Sister Ziyuan?" Li Yundong shook his head with a smile, but soon nodded again. "Yes and no, Ziyuan's matter is only one of them." Su Chan said, "Yundong, a lot of things have happened recently. Which one are you most worried about now?" Li Yundong sighed. "What I'm most worried about is that these seemingly unrelated things are actually the same thing." Su Chan was stunned for a moment, then her eyes slightly widened. "You mean?" Li Yundong nodded slowly. "I always feel that these things happen together. No matter how I look at it, it doesn't seem like a coincidence. It's like a pair of invisible hands weaving everything. Su-chan was shocked. What do you think someone is controlling? Li Yundong said softly. That's alarmist talk. Although people plan, if you want to succeed, you still have to rely on God's will. Many of these things happen strangely. Some seem to be man-made, but some seem to be just coincidences. But when these man-made and coincidental factors come together, it's really too much of a headache. Su-chan let out an "ah" and understood what Li Yundong meant. You mean if it's purely man-made, then you can still predict and deal with it. But when this man-made matter is mixed with accidental events, it will cause the whole thing to slide into an unpredictable situation. Is that so? Li Yundong gently patted the little girl on the shoulder and said, Yes, especially when I saw Xueqi leave, the uneasiness in my heart became more and more intense. Su-chan couldn't help asking, since you're so worried, why didn't you keep her at the beginning? Li Yundong smiled bitterly. Keep her? How? Tell her. You may be the reincarnation of the mystical silver fox? Alas, now that Xueqi has been possessed by the mystical silver fox, it is only a matter of time before the mystical silver fox's memory recovers. If an outsider stimulates her, she will recover faster. Once the mystical silver fox's memory recovers, then, no one can predict what the consequences will be. Although I am now the leader of the Foxen men, and she is the fourth leader of the Foxen men, but I always feel that nothing good will happen to me if I meet her. As he said this, Li Yundong turned his face and looked at Su-chan seriously. Chaner, if I fight with the mystical silver fox, who will you help? Su-chan didn't even think about it and said, Of course, I will help my master. The little girl wrinkled her nose and smiled heartlessly, but she soon smiled again and said, But it won't happen. After all, we are all men. We won't fight. Seeing that the little girl was naive and optimistic, Li Yundong couldn't bear to pour cold water on her, so he swallowed his worry and didn't say it out loud. He smiled slightly and said, I hope so. However, it's not a good thing to leave President Chow outside. If someone finds out that she is the reincarnation of the mystical silver fox, it will be troublesome. I'll call her in 2 days and find an excuse to ask her to come over. I'm about to go through the thunder retribution. When I do, I'll be able to repair Xueqi's powerful magical weapon. Once the magical weapon is repaired, I'll be able to separate Xueqi's divine sense and memory and let her be reborn. Su-chan put her palms together and said softly, Ba, I hope God will bless me and everything will go well. She murmured for a while and suddenly thought of something. She said, Oh, I forgot to ask Master how to break the absolute love extinguishing array. This memory of mine. The little girl was so anxious that she jumped up and wanted to rush into her master's room. Li Yundong immediately grabbed her and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Why are you so anxious? What time is it now? Why are you still disturbing your master? Aren't you afraid that she will spank you? The little girl rolled her eyes and said with a smile, Well, I'll go to her early in the morning tomorrow. Li Yundong smiled and tapped the tip of her nose. A few days ago, I praised you for growing up. Now it seems that it was just an illusion. Su-chan made a face at Li Yundong and said, No, I've made progress. Besides, I'm still a little girl. Li Yundong smiled and said, You're a little girl? You're not a little girl. Li Yundong's words had a double meaning. The little girl blushed and said angrily, You're so annoying. You're not being serious after just a few words. Her shy appearance made Li Yundong's heart beat faster. He was about to say a few more jokes when he suddenly heard a rumble outside. It was the sound of winter thunder. Li Yundong immediately sat up straight, and an extremely sharp look suddenly appeared in his eyes. Thunder in this season? The little girl was also so shocked that she sat up from Li Yundong's arms. She looked surprised. No way. Winter thunder is shaking. What's going on? Could it be that someone is going through the thunder retribution? Li Yundong shook his head and said, It's unlikely, but looking at the weather today, it's not like there will be thunder. It's probably someone who has attracted the thunder. The little girl said in a low voice. Then who could it be? Li Yundong shook his head solemnly. He vaguely felt that this kind of thunder was a little familiar, but he didn't dare to confirm it. He didn't want to care about this matter at first, but soon the thunder came one after another, making Li Yundong's heart jump just by listening to it. At this time, The rest of the family were also awakened by the thunder and walked out of their rooms. At this time, Li Yundong's room was also knocked. Li Yundong called out, "Please come in," and Zi Yuan walked in. As soon as Zi Yuan entered the room, she asked, "Did you hear the thunder?" Li Yundong's face was serious. Yes. Although the expression on Zi Yuan's face was indifferent, there was a deep worry in the corners of her eyes. "What do you think?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "It's really not a good sign for the thunder to shake in winter when the heavenly tribulation is coming. Come on, let's go out and talk." Li Yundong walked out of the room and saw that almost everyone in the room had come out, looking in the direction of the thunder in surprise. Li Yundong looked left and right, but he couldn't find Ao Wushuang. He couldn't help asking curiously, "Where is Senior Ao Wushuang?" Su Chan hurriedly said, "I'll go find her." Li Yundong nodded, and the little girl immediately rushed to Ao Wushuang's room. But not long after, he heard Su Chan let out a frightened cry. Li Yundong's heart suddenly tightened, and he immediately rushed toward Su Chan. Chapter 8:17. Li Yundong quickly rushed to Ao Wushuang's room, only to see Ao Wushuang standing there in a daze. Her body was trembling slightly, and her eyes were full of fear and worry. Li Yundong's heart sank. He immediately went forward and looked inside. "What's wrong?" He looked into the room and saw that the French window of the bedroom connected to the balcony was wide open. Because the door was open, the wind passed through the room and blew the screen window in the air. Next to the screen window, there was a pool of blood on the ground, surrounded by blood. However, there was a 3-feet-long Qingfeng sword floating in the room. It was the Bahuang sword that Ao Wushuang had always carried with her. The Bahuang sword floated alone in the air. When it saw Li Yundong, it made a buzzing sound and flew toward him with a flash of lightning. Li Yundong was shocked and his heart skipped a beat. He thought to himself, "Oh no, where did Ao Wushuang go in the middle of the night? Why is there a pool of blood in her room? Why is the Bahuang sword here alone? I guess something has happened to Ao Wushuang." Su Chan's eyes were also full of tears. She turned around and put her arms around Li Yundong's waist, sobbing helplessly, "Something has happened to my master. Yundong, something must have happened to her." Li Yundong also hugged her and comforted her in a low voice. "It's okay. Your master's spiritual energy is very strong. She'll be fine." It was not easy for Su Chan to meet her master again. She had just gotten her master's promise that she would never leave again, but her master disappeared that night, and the situation was so strange. Su Chan said with tears in her eyes, "Did my master meet some bad people and get taken away?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "That's impossible. Your master's spiritual energy is very strong and she's good at fighting. Moreover, she lives right under our noses. It's impossible for her to be taken away without making any noise." At this time, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others also heard the noise and rushed over one after another. Hearing Li Yundong's words, Zi Yuan looked around the room and said, "Yes, in my opinion, Ao Wushuang must have met a strong enemy outside. She came back to take some of her things, returned the Bahuang sword, and then left quickly." At this time, Su Chan was very concerned. Her previous intelligence was completely gone. She said anxiously, "Why did she leave? Even if she encounters a strong enemy, we can still help her." Li Yundong stroked her hair lovingly and said slowly, "It's probably because your master has encountered some formidable opponents and doesn't want to implicate us." Zi Yuan nodded and said, "I guess so. With Ao Wushuang's personality, she definitely doesn't want to trouble us with her own affairs, so she's probably hiding to recuperate now." As she said this, she turned her head to look at Li Yundong and asked, "What should we do? Should we look for her?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly and shook his head. "Where can I find it? Sigh, Senior Wushuang is too stubborn. She would rather bear it alone than implicate us. Now she's injured and needs help. She even returned the Bahuang sword." With that, he patted Su Chan on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry. Since your master can return the Bahuang sword, it means that her injury is not serious. Moreover, she wants to tell us not to worry about her." Only then did Su Chan feel a little relieved. She wiped away her tears with a gloomy expression. She bit her lip and stared at the pool of blood on the ground. No one knew what she was thinking. In this world, apart from Li Yundong, her master was the person who treated her the best. Now that her master was missing, How could she not panic? Moreover, what made her most uncomfortable was that she wanted to find her master, but she didn't know where she was. This feeling of powerlessness really made her feel extremely sad. Seeing the little girl lowering her head and crying, Li Yundong sighed softly in his heart. He patted Su Chan on the shoulder and comforted her. Don't worry, your master will definitely be fine. Maybe when she recovers, she will come to us herself. Don't worry. Come, smile. If you cry like a cat, it'll be ugly. Even if I don't despise you, your master will. Su Chan sobbed, wiped her tears and said, Master will not abandon me. She will never abandon me. Li Yundong held the little girl in his arms and sighed. He didn't say anything else, just gently stroking the little girl's back. At this time, the others in the room looked at each other and silently retreated. After Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan left the room, Zhou Qin grabbed Zi Yuan and said in a low voice, Zi Yuan, I think there's something strange about this matter. Zi Yuan nodded. Indeed, a series of things that have happened recently. It's really unbelievable. How did they all come together? Zhou Qin had a worried look on her face. She whispered worriedly, I always have a bad feeling. I'm afraid. She didn't finish her sentence. No one knew whether it was because she didn't dare to say it or because she couldn't imagine what would happen. Zi Yuan sighed softly and said, Don't think so much. If it's a blessing, it's not a curse. If it's a curse, it can't be avoided. Now the enemy is in the dark and we are in the light. It's useless to think so much and do so much. It's going to be the spring festival soon. After the spring festival, it will be the beginning of spring. After the beginning of spring, it will be the rain. After the rain, it will be the waking of insects. In the waking of insects period, it will be the golden time to cross the thunder retribution. I believe that during this period of time, there should be no more activities. At this time, no matter which sect they are from, as long as they are Jinshin masters, they will try their best to gain more or less benefits from the heavenly thunder. Zhou Qin nodded silently, indicating that she agreed with Zi Yuan's opinion. In fact, Zi Yuan was right. After this night, whether it was Ao Wushuang, who had a fierce battle with the mystical silver fox, or the mystical silver fox, who had taken Lu Feier hostage, they had all disappeared, as if they had evaporated from the world. Other sects had also fallen into a hibernation period. Whether it was the Zhangyi school, the Chuanjin dragon sect, other Chinese cultivation sects, or some Japanese cultivation sects, they were all actively preparing for the upcoming thunder retribution period. The plan for a day was in the morning, the plan for a year was in the spring, and the plan for a whole year was in the waking of insects period. The annual thunder retribution period was the most important day for cultivators. Almost all the cultivators who were active in the secular world had also chosen to go into seclusion. Although some of them could not cross the thunder retribution period, the spiritual qi of heaven and earth was overflowing in the thunder retribution period, was the best time for cultivation. Even if they meditated and practiced qi, they would get twice the result with half the effort. After the successive events of the 6 major sects besieging the Fox Zen sect, the pill-snatching battle of Mount Gazao, the Taoist assembly, Li Yundong's battle with Mount Koya, and the succession ceremony of the leader of the Linggong sect, the cultivation world, which had been silent and low-key, suddenly became noisy because of Li Yundong's appearance. Even many great cultivators who had been living in seclusion had turned their eyes to the secular world again. The cultivators who had been cultivating in the secular world were so excited as if they were celebrating a festival every day, because they knew that the cultivation world had not been so lively for a long time. However, as the spring festival was approaching, Li Yundong, who could cause trouble in the cultivation world the most, did not move. The cultivators and cultivation sects who were secretly watching Li Yundong also quieted down tacitly. The cultivators who could jump up and down also shifted their attention and began to prepare for the spring festival and the thunder retribution period. The originally bustling cultivation world suddenly fell into silence. After a series of waves, this kind of silence made people feel nervous and depressed. Many keen cultivators felt that there was a terrible force behind this silence, as if an undersea volcano was brewing and accumulating energy to erupt. At this time, the mystical silver fox with Lu Feier unexpectedly appeared in the distant Dongying. Nishino, Japan. Nishino was located in Nishino, Blackwood County, in the middle of Honshu, Japan. In the 7th century AD, Blackwood County, as the center of Buddhism in East Japan, was once very prosperous. In the 12th century AD, Japan entered the Warring States period, where Genji and Heihei fought for hegemony. Because the famous archer Miura Yoshiaki had once shot a vital arrow to kill the mystical silver fox, archery had once flourished here. In the future, famous archers like Nishino emerged. Blackwood County was the largest county in the Kanto region of Japan, and there were many tourist attractions. However, when it came to Nishino, every Japanese and tourists who went to Japan would mention Nishino, and when it came to Nishino, no one would not mention the Killing Stone. The mystical silver fox wandered in the Killing Stone scenic area with Lu Feier. She looked around and saw that there were green mountains all around. Although they were not high, they were covered with green vegetation. Although it was winter, they were still lush and green, like a fresh oil painting. In this green picture scroll, the Killing Stone scenic area was extremely conspicuous. In the 12th century AD, the 80,000 troops sent by the mystical silver fox and the Emperor of Bird Feather, as well as the masters of the Japanese cultivation world, fought here. After a bloody battle, the mystical silver fox was weak and finally defeated and sealed. However, although the mystical silver fox was barely sealed, her spiritual energy could constantly penetrate through the seal. Her deep anger and hatred and powerful spiritual energy dyed the sealed stone into a terrible black color. With the erosion of time, the power of the mystical silver fox continued to leak out, eroding the green land nearby, which was originally green and grassy, to the point that not a single blade of grass grew. There was a piece of black stone around. As long as any life passed by this black stone, it would be mercilessly absorbed. This matter caused a shock in Japan for a while, and the cultivation world was in a panic. They all knew that once the mystical silver fox recovered her strength and was released, her anger would engulf the whole Japan. The Japanese cultivation world, which had been greatly damaged in the Battle of Susano, was unable to resist the revenge of the mystical silver fox. Japan was very likely to disappear from the world. It was also because of this that the famous Japanese monk Yuan Wang volunteered to come to Susano. He sat cross-legged under the Killing Stone every day and recited scriptures to suppress the power of the mystical silver fox. Although the mystical silver fox had been sealed and only a small part of its power had seeped out, the endless power was still irresistible to Yuan Wang. Later, the famous Japanese Yin-yang master Abe personally took action and worked with Yuan Wang to put on a show. Finally, the mystical silver fox was completely sealed. In order to prevent some people with bad intentions from using the sealed mystical silver fox to do something, and at the same time to calm the hearts of the ordinary people of Japan, the Japanese cultivation world announced that the mystical silver fox was dead and the Killing Stone was no longer a threat. At first, the Japanese people didn't believe it at all. It was so easy to fight against 80,000 soldiers and the strong people of the entire Japanese cultivation world. What a joke! But slowly, there were always some bold people who passed by the Killing Stone and found that the Killing Stone in Xueqi no longer absorbed life. At this time, the Japanese believed that the mystical silver fox had really died. With the passage of time, the history of the past had become a myth and legend today. The battlefield of the past had also become a famous tourist attraction. Now, after nearly 900 years, when the mystical silver fox came to Xueqi, which had left a deep impression on her, she was really filled with emotion when she looked at everything in front of her. The mystical silver fox looked around and saw that there was a stone field in the Killing Stone scenic spot. The center of the stone field was full of black stones, which had been polluted by the mystical silver fox's Xueqi when she had been sealed. On the edge of the stone field, the green grass and the trees, there was a small path made of stones. The path was extremely narrow, and there was a low stone fence beside it. In the distance, there was a simple Japanese-style temple. It was the temple of the eminent monk Yuan Wang. The mystical silver fox looked at the tourists wandering on the path, taking photos everywhere, and then at the lush green vegetation in the distance. She couldn't help but shake her head and sigh. After nearly 900 years, this place had changed so much that she couldn't recognize it. Originally, there was not so much green vegetation here. It was just a barren mountain range, but at this time, it seemed to have become a green sea. She didn't know if it was because of a fierce battle in the past that countless Japanese warriors fell here. Their corpses and blood moistened the land and provided rich nutrition for the vegetation. In the end, this place became like this. After getting along with the mystical silver fox these days, Lu Feier saw that she didn't mean to kill her. She was often in a daze alone, as if she was recalling the glorious days of the past, or as if she was in a daze in the face of this strange world. Apart from that, there was nothing fierce about her. Although she didn't speak much and was arrogant, she could still get along with her. Seeing the mystical silver fox standing quietly in the killing stone scenic spot, her eyes full of vicissitudes, she couldn't help but ask Chowj. Well, mystical silver fox, why are we here? Only then did the mystical silver fox come to her senses. She glanced at Lu Feier, and a meaningful smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. She said softly, haven't you heard of a saying? The most dangerous place is also the safest place. After saying that, she chuckled and sighed with emotion, don't ask so much. Come with me. After that, he walked toward the Stone of Slaughter scenic area. Lu Feier was stunned and had to follow him step by step. He hadn't spoken for a while, so he nagged. Thank you for your concern. My father-in-law was fine a while ago, but on the last day of the MRI examination, the result was a brain aneurysm. Although it was not big, it made people a little uneasy to think about it. Although the hospital's cold system was very wicked, his father-in-law was only hospitalized for examination. He didn't have a drip, he didn't take drugs, and he didn't have an operation. The hospital was not profitable, so they always wanted to rush his father-in-law out of the hospital. However, the doctor still had some medical ethics. He didn't say such a wicked thing as letting his father-in-law have an operation. It was a blessing in misfortune. In the past few days, Tang Tang had been so busy that he didn't know what year it was. Looking back, Xiao Xiao had said that it had almost 300 words. It was estimated that it was a little close to the end. It was estimated that it would end in another 20,000 or 300,000 words. Someone asked me what I would write in the next book and what style it would be. Now I can tell you that the style is basically the same as this book, and it is inherited from this story. However, the story of Li Yundong has ended, and the story of another protagonist has begun. The stories of Zhou Qin, Ding Nan, Lin Miao, John, Yan Feng, Mei Duo, and others will be replaced in the next book. More cultivation sects will be unveiled one by one and show their talents. The cultivation world will become more magnificent, and more interesting campus cultivation stories will be meaningful. Many foreshadowing in this book will also be replaced in the next book. Yes, I wrote many foreshadowing in this book that you think is meaningless. I am preparing for the next book. The relationship between the two novels is a bit similar to the relationship between The Legend of the Condor Heroes and The Return of the Condor Heroes. Of course, the content is completely different. Maybe some readers will want to continue reading. Maybe some people don't want to continue reading. Tang Tang, I can only say that the next book will be very good, even better than this one. This is my promise. Just like when Pirate King in a Different World finished, I promised my book friends. My next book will be very good. After being busy for the past 2 days, including the ones I owe before, I owe a total of 2 chapters. Although my father-in-law is fine for the time being, and Tang Tang has also returned to Suzhou, I have a lot of things on my hands now. Now, Tang Tang, I write during the day, write the script in the afternoon, and after training at night, I have to give lessons. I am very busy every day. After this month, I will probably have to go to Beijing again next month. I really don't know when I will be able to make up for the 2 chapters 1-0. I really don't know when I will be able to make up for the 2 chapters 1-0. If I can't make up for it, please show some mercy when you scold me. Don't involve my family. Tang Tang, I will cup my hands and thank you. In addition, I wish all of you good health. If there is anything, don't be sick. If there is nothing, don't be poor. Chapter 8:18. In the murderous stone scenic area of Xueqi, Lu Feier looked around curiously. Although she already knew the identity of the mystical silver fox, she didn't know what the relationship between the mystical silver fox and this place was. She didn't know why the mystical silver fox looked at all this in front of her with such vicissitudes in her eyes, as if she had been here hundreds of years ago. There was a faint smell of sulfur in the air around the murderous stone scenic area, which smelled a little different. There were many tourists here, many of whom were Chinese. Lu Feier heard from the Chinese tour guide that the smell of sulfur was the poisonous gas left by the algae 900 years ago. Originally, the poisonous gas here was so strong that people would die if they got close to it, but after 900 years of evacuation, there was only a little smell of sulfur left. But the stream near the killing lifestone was polluted by the algae, so it was still undrinkable. But strangely, although the stream was undrinkable, it still had the miraculous effect of beautifying one's face. Therefore, many female tourists gathered in front of the stream. Some held the water in their hands and used it to wash their faces. Some simply emptied the mineral water they carried with them and put the empty bottle into the stream. After filling it with water, they beamed with satisfaction and left. Lu Feier was a rare beauty, but the more beautiful a woman was, the more she loved to be beautiful. Lu Feier saw that many female tourists were washing their faces with water by the stream. She couldn't help squatting down curiously and bending down to hold the water. However, Lu Feier was too beautiful. As soon as she squatted down, the female tourists nearby unconsciously made way for her. They didn't want to stand with her and become her foil. Lu Feier had been with the mystical silver fox for the past few days, so she didn't have the time or condition to do any maintenance, let alone anything like a spa or skincare. At this time, she held the water and applied it to her face. She immediately felt that her skin seemed to be greedily absorbing the water, and her face suddenly had a cool and moisturizing feeling. After washing her face, she took out her mobile phone and took a picture of herself. Sure enough, her face seemed to have become more lustrous, as if it did have the effect of beauty and nourishing her face. Lu Feier couldn't help but wonder, it's really amazing. Why can't this water be drunk, but it has the effect of beautifying and nourishing the skin? The mystical silver fox couldn't help but sneer and say, nonsense, this land was soaked by my Xueqi and magic power, and the stream in the mountain was naturally full of my residual magic power and Xueqi. If people drank it at that time, their blood and qi would boil and their meridians would burst and they would die. Although it has been nearly 900 years, and the magic power and true essence that I left behind in the past have almost dissipated, this kind of water is still not something that ordinary people can drink. If it is drunk into the body, it will cause the internal organs to churn, and the blood and qi will be disturbed. However, if it is only applied externally, it will sting the skin, and it has the effect of promoting blood circulation and nourishing the skin. This principle is the same as the soap you are using now. You can use it but you can't eat it. Lu Feier suddenly understood and said, oh, but soon her eyes widened. She stared at the mystical silver fox and stammered. What? You just said that this piece of land left behind your true what you on? Could it be that you are Yu Zhao? The mystical silver fox glanced at her and said with some disdain, that's the name given to me by the Japanese. Lu Feier was born in a famous family and had an excellent upbringing. Although she was not well read, she was not modest when she said that she was well educated and reasonable. She was very different from many idiots in the entertainment circle who could not even sing the national anthem completely. She didn't know the origin of the mystical silver fox, but Lu Feier, who sometimes went to Japan to film, knew the name of Yu Zhao. She looked at the mystical silver fox with a face full of shock and fear. At the same time, there was a trace of excitement in her heart. Sister Chao's previous life turned out to be Yu Zhao? But she said that she was the mystical silver fox. Why haven't I heard of the name mystical silver fox? Lu Feier couldn't help but ask the mystical silver fox the question in her heart. Then the mystical silver fox sneered and said meaningfully, do you think that the rulers of all dynasties will like a person like me? Lu Feier blinked her eyes and didn't seem to understand. She didn't know that the mystical silver fox had once caused a great disturbance in the Chinese cultivation world, and even contributed to the destruction of the late Tang dynasty. Since she was driven out by the Chinese cultivation world began to block the mystical silver fox and kill the fox Zen men, which caused the fox Zen men to decline rapidly. The big and small foxes all fled into the deep mountains and forests, not daring to come out easily. Naturally, it was impossible for the rulers of China to pursue a 9-tailed celestial fox that the heavens did not care about. Moreover, no matter whether they believed in Buddhism or Taoism, these two sects hated the mystical silver fox to the extreme and gnashed their teeth. Therefore, in order to get the support of these cultivators, the first thing the emperors had to do was to block any books and oral stories about the mystical silver fox. Slowly, the illustrious reputation of the mystical silver fox was buried in the world of history. However, her name shone in another form in another border country. Of course, the mystical silver fox would not show off the past superficially, so she kept her mouth shut about the past. Lu Feier had to think hard about it and did not dare to ask more questions. After a while, the mystical silver fox continued to walk toward the Stone of Slaughter scenic area, and Lu Feier followed closely behind. The two of them walked along the stone road and finally came to the place where the Stone of Slaughter was located. Lu Feier looked around and saw that there were black stones everywhere in this stone field. In this stone field, there were many big and small stone monks. Some of these stone monks were bald, and some had white or red hats on their heads. They looked very interesting with red and white. Lu Feier heard from the tour guide that these stone monks were all erected to commemorate the monks who had chanted scriptures to suppress the demon aura in front of them. The largest of them was the stone statue of monk Yuan Wang. The stone statue of Yuan Wang was sitting cross-legged on the largest black stone of slaughter. There was a stone lotus seat under his feet. He was wearing a hat made of red thread and his hands were pinching his fingers. There were 4 stone monks standing beside him. Beside the stone monk, there was a large cube stone. Many tourists here also built stone towers on these black stone of slaughter to commemorate monk Yuan Wang. They intended to continue to suppress and seal the mystical silver fox. Lu Feier listened to the tour guide's explanation while watching the tourists build up the stone tower. At the same time, she quietly observed the expression of the mystical silver fox out of the corner of her eye. She saw that the mystical silver fox's face was cold. Her eyes were full of ridicule, and there was a disdainful sneer on the corner of her mouth. Lu Feier was very worried that with the arrogance of the mystical silver fox, she would kill these civilians. Fortunately, the mystical silver fox just watched coldly from the side and did not do anything excessive. But soon, a few bald monks in monk robes passed by this small road. When they headed for the temple on the mountainside, the mystical silver fox's eyes were immediately filled with killing intent. Her whole body became murderous, and the original black eyes in her eyes turned blood red in an instant. Lu Feier was so scared that she shivered. She couldn't help but reach out to grab the mystical silver fox. As soon as the mystical silver fox was pulled by her, it immediately turned its head and stared at Lu Feier with terrifying eyes, without saying a word. Lu Feier was so scared that her scalp exploded. Her blood almost froze. She stammered, What do you want to do? Don't be impulsive. The mystical silver fox's blood-red eyes stared at Lu Feier for a long time. Slowly, the killing intent in her eyes subsided little by little, and her eyes turned from blood-red to pitch black. The mystical silver fox said in an extremely cold voice, If there is another time, I will kill you first. Are you kidding me? In those days, I killed whoever I wanted to kill. I was so proud of my kindness and enmity. Today you, a little mortal, dare to come and tell me what to do? Lu Feier was so shocked that her pretty face turned pale. She nodded quickly and didn't dare to say another word. The mystical silver fox glanced at the monk who had left, and the pupils in her eyes instantly shrank into needles. Her sharp eyes shot out like a sharp sword, which was noticed by the 2 monks at once. They turned around in surprise and looked in the direction of her eyes. But when they turned around, the mystical silver fox had already retracted her gaze, turned around, and left slowly. How could the 2 monks have expected that the mystical silver fox, who had been sealed 900 years ago, was right beside them? She had almost killed them. If they had known this, they would have been scared to death on the spot. After looking at it for a while, the 2 monks found nothing unusual, so they turned around and left. The mystical silver fox walked along the road to the hotel near the scenic spot. When they arrived at the hotel, Lu Feier couldn't help but ask boldly, Are we staying here today? The mystical silver fox didn't look back and said, Is there anything strange? Lu Feier said in a low voice, Chouge. No, you don't seem to have a carry-on bag, passport and money. The mystical silver fox said casually, Don't you have it? Hearing this, Lu Feier was stunned. She said in a low voice, My bag was also lost when the car was smashed. If you hadn't taken me here, I wouldn't have been able to enter the country. The mystical silver fox thought for a moment and said in a cold voice, Then kill all the people in this hotel. After that she stepped in. Lu Feier was stunned. She watched the mystical silver fox walk into the hotel. She wanted to stop it, but she remembered the warning of the mystical silver fox before. She didn't dare to persuade it again, for fear that the big devil would be angry and kill her as well. Lu Feier was stunned for a while. Suddenly, she couldn't help but shout in panic. She chased after the mystical silver fox and walked in. At this time, no one in the Japanese cultivation world noticed that the mystical silver fox had returned to the old place and returned to their land. She was hiding in the dark and watching them covetously, ready to launch a terrible attack on the Japanese cultivation world at any time. Chapter 8:19. The mystical silver fox did not immediately launch a crazy revenge on the Japanese cultivation world. She patiently lurked and hid in a place that no one would have thought of. At this time, the Japanese cultivation world and the whole country were in a state of peace. Although on the other side of the distant coast, the Chinese cultivation world was welcoming the annual Spring Festival, the Japanese side was calm. In order to avoid revealing her whereabouts, the mystical silver fox did not kill the owner of the hotel in the end. She just deceived them with a simple illusion, but she swaggered in with Lu Feier. A few days later, the Spring Festival was approaching quickly. Lu Feier sat under the eaves of the Japanese house in boredom all day, looking at the direction of her hometown in a daze. She didn't know if she could go back alive, nor did she know if she could see her family again. But at least there was no hope for this year's Spring Festival. The mystical silver fox also restrained her aura and knelt on the tatami like an ordinary person. She looked at the people outside the corridor with flickering eyes, as if she was thinking about something. She was a famous cultivator in the Tang dynasty. Her words and deeds still carried the customs of the Tang dynasty. For example, kneeling on the ground like this, she did it very skillfully and naturally. The culture and etiquette of the Japanese were almost completely copied from the Tang dynasty. Even the Japanese themselves admitted that without the Tang dynasty, there would be no Japanese culture and etiquette. Therefore, the natural behavior of the mystical silver fox made her look no different from the authentic Japanese. Especially after taking a bath, she wore a kimono. She was really beautiful. On the contrary, Lu Feier was not used to it. She just sat on her side, one hand on the ground, and the other hand playing with a blade of grass in boredom. After a while, the mystical silver fox looked around coldly for a while and suddenly asked, "Why are these Japanese so leisurely?" Lu Feier was stunned and asked curiously, "What?" The mystical silver fox pointed to some Japanese people who were bending down to clean. "Why aren't they busy preparing for the new year? Isn't it going to be the new year? Or are they ready?" Lu Feier laughed and said, "The Japanese don't celebrate the Spring Festival." The mystical silver fox's eyes narrowed and she asked in surprise, "Why?" She had lived in Japan for a long time and knew a lot of Japanese customs. At that time, everyone in Japan celebrated the Spring Festival. At that time, the Spring Festival was the most important festival in Japan. When the Spring Festival came, the whole country was jubilant, and the emperor would also celebrate with the people. Even the poorest people would try their best to change into a new set of clothes, eat a steaming meal of rice balls, and then go to the nearest temple or shrine to worship, praying that the next year would be more prosperous. Lu Feier looked at the mystical silver fox with a strange expression and said timidly, "You may. Well, you have been sealed for too long. I don't know what has happened in the past 900 years. In the past, the Japanese did celebrate the Spring Festival, but after the Meiji Restoration, Japan announced that it would leave Asia and enter Europe, so it no longer celebrated the Spring Festival and changed it to New Year's Day." The mystical silver fox narrowed her eyes and couldn't help laughing coldly. Even in the era when she was sealed, the reign of the Emperor Nyoyu corresponded to the period of Emperor Huizong and Emperor Qinzong of Song. At that time, the northern Song dynasty died out and the southern Song dynasty was established. Although the Song dynasty was surrounded by Liao, Jin and Xixiao at that time, it was besieged on all sides. The military was low and the politics were rotten, but the incomparably powerful Han civilization still radiated throughout Southeast Asia. Almost all countries in Southeast Asia respected the Chinese civilization. Even the Liao state, Xixiao state, and later the Jin state, and even the Yuan dynasty, which finally unified China, were all assimilated by the Chinese civilization without exception. Although the Song dynasty in this period was a little weak in military and politics, the mystical silver fox was still able to be fanatically pursued by the daimyo of all countries in Japan when she was in a foreign country. Her mentality was still that of a superior in the Tang and Song dynasties. She couldn't understand why such a little brother, who used to learn everything from China, would turn his back on her one day. "Where is the confidence of these guys?" The mystical silver fox sneered and said, "What a group of bastards who forget their ancestors. Well, this is even better. I have more reasons to deal with them." Lu Feier heard the murderous intent in her words, and couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. She was afraid that the mystical silver fox would get angry and expand the situation, so she quickly said, "There are many reasons for this." "Yoop." Unexpectedly, the mystical silver fox didn't have the patience to listen to her explanation at all. She just asked coldly, "In addition to these Dongying people, which other countries are not celebrating the Spring Festival now?" Lu Feier was shocked when she heard this. She thought to herself, "Oh my God, do you think you are the Emperor of Jade Emperor? Do you want to care about these things? Times are different now." But she still whispered honestly, There are also North Korea, South Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia and other countries. The mystical silver fox heard a muffled snort, and the anger on her face eased a lot. She snorted and said, "I see. I will let these Japanese remember a lot of things." Hearing this, Lu Feier complained to herself, "What can I do? If she were to cause some big trouble, would I be considered an accomplice? I'm in trouble." Just as the mystical silver fox was sharpening her knife and Lu Feier was complaining, a few days later, in the distant Tianan city, Li Yundong and the others finally spent the New Year's Eve together at home, ushering in the first day of the Lunar New Year. On the first day of the New Year, many shops did not open and chose to close the market for 3 days. The originally bustling pedestrian street also seemed quite deserted. Only de Sanxian was still open. Many girls who did not go home and chose to work were still busy in the shop. Therefore, early in the morning, Li Yundong took Su Chan and the others to the shop early and gave everyone a big red envelope. Although Feng Na and Cheng Cheng had spent the New Year's Eve with their own families, they knew that Li Yundong would come to the store early in the morning to pay his New Year's greetings to the employees. So they got up early in the morning, dressed up nicely, and rushed to the store. When they arrived at the shop, Li Yundong was already standing at the entrance of the shop. He was wearing a bright red tang suit. Although he looked young, he had an extraordinary temperament. When he saw Feng Na coming, Li Yundong was the first to smile. He cupped his hands and said, "Happy New Year." Today, Feng Na was wearing a wool ball cap, a coffee-made sweater, and a short skirt. She looked both youthful and fashionable. When she saw Li Yundong greeting her, she smiled and cupped her hands in greeting. "Congratulations on getting rich. Here comes the red packet." Li Yundong nodded. "Give me the red packet." Although Li Yundong had been hiding something in his heart for the past few days, he still looked very happy in front of such a festive occasion. He laughed and took out a red envelope like a magic trick. He handed it to Feng Na and said, "The red envelope is here." Feng Na guessed that Li Yundong would make a big profit today. She pursed her lips and smiled. "There really is a red envelope?" Cheng Cheng, who was following behind her, looked curiously at Li Yundong and couldn't help but ask, "Ah, is there a red envelope for me?" Li Yundong smiled and took out another red envelope. "Everyone who sees it gets a share." Before Feng Na could take the red envelope, Cheng Cheng grabbed it unceremoniously and said with a smile, "Well, it's good that there's a share for me." After taking it, Cheng Cheng squeezed her hand and felt that the red envelope was very light and thin. She rolled her eyes and said angrily, "Hey, big boss, the red envelope is so thin and light. Aren't you a little stingy?" Feng Na immediately glared at her and said, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Li Yundong knew that this big beauty liked to joke around and was straightforward, so he waved his hand without a care and said with a smile, "Open it and take a look." The chairman said, "Well, if you don't investigate, you don't have the right to speak. Don't take it for granted." Cheng Cheng giggled. She opened the red envelope and took a look inside, only to see that there was only one piece of paper inside. It was a check. She took it out and looked at it. Her eyes suddenly widened and she cried out involuntarily, "No way! So much!" Feng Na, who was standing to one side, was shocked. She looked at the check in Cheng Cheng's hand and was immediately shocked by the number on it. "Are you kidding me? Last month, I was still a college student who didn't earn a penny, and this month, I can immediately get 50,000 yuan? Even in my dreams, it's not as good as this." Cheng Cheng stared at the check in her hand, dumbfounded. She knew that Li Yundong was a generous person, and that he would definitely be generous. That was why she had made such a joke with him, but she hadn't expected him to be so generous. She had only worked for the 3 immortals for less than a month. "That's all?" Cheng Cheng's eyes widened, and she turned to look at Feng Na. "How much is yours?" Feng Na glanced at Li Yundong, a little embarrassed, as if she was embarrassed to open the red envelope in front of him. But Li Yundong just smiled at her, nodded, and said, "Open it. It's not much. It's just a token of appreciation." "It's just a token." Feng Na took a deep breath, opened the red envelope, and saw that there was also a check inside. She glanced at it briefly and saw that it was also a long string of zeros. She was so scared that she immediately closed the red envelope, handed it back and shook her head. "It's too much. I can't afford it." Li Yundong didn't take it. He just smiled and said, This is what you deserve. Don't stand on ceremony. Chung Chong, who was standing to one side, smiled and pressed Feng Na's hand. Okay, don't pretend to be polite. As she said this, she pretended to reach out her hand, patted Li Yundong on the shoulder, and said with a smile, "Well, I was wrong about you just now. I forgive you. You have to keep up the good work, little guy." Although Li Yundong was the boss, he was easygoing. He was used to joking with Feng Na and Cheng Cheng in the past. He pretended to be a yes-man and said, "I will work hard. I will definitely not let down the ardent expectations of the beautiful woman." His appearance made the people around him unable to help but laugh, and Cheng Cheng was even more giggling. Feng Na looked at them and sighed inwardly. Li Yundong looked at the crowd with a smile and said, "Don't be so happy, everyone. I have something very important to announce." When everyone heard this, they all looked at Li Yundong, wanting to hear what this young and generous little boss had to announce. Halfway through the second chapter, I really can't write anymore. I'll get up tomorrow morning and make up for it. Everyone, don't wait. Chapter 8:20. Li Yundong looked around and saw that there were only 2 or 3 girls who had come to work in the Sanxian store. He smiled and said, "Don't worry. Let's wait until everyone is here. Let's talk about it later." Seeing that he was keeping them in suspense, everyone laughed. It didn't take long for the temporary staff in the store to arrive one after another. Li Yundong gave each of them a big red envelope. For a moment, all the girls cheered, and the entrance of the store was filled with laughter. It was very lively. After a while, everyone had arrived. On the first day of the new year, there were no customers in the store. The hall was full of his own people, and all of them were beautiful girls. Even the girls who had come to work in the Desanxian store were all beautiful. It was like a painting, pleasing to the eye. Li Yundong clapped his hands to attract everyone's attention. He smiled and said, "Today, everyone is here. On the first day of the new year, I have good news for everyone." At this time, a bold girl said, "Li Yun. Boss, are you going to give us 2 red envelopes?" The girls all laughed and said, "Shameless. Isn't 1 red envelope enough? Where else can we find a good boss like Boss Li? He's only been working for a few days, and he's already giving out so many red envelopes. I'm so happy. It's a pity that we can't come to work and make money when school starts. Yeah, it would be great if we could work here all the time." The girls chattered with a face full of happiness and regret at the same time. Li Yundong looked at them with a smile, and suddenly felt very happy and satisfied. This feeling of being able to help others was stronger than making a lot of money himself. He smiled and said, "Today, I want to tell you that Desanxian has hired Feng Na as the manager and Cheng Cheng as the deputy manager. In addition, your temporary workers will be turned into regular workers." When the girls heard this, their eyes suddenly widened, and they could hardly believe their ears. Although the girls had initially come to the store because of Li Yundong's fame, they thought to themselves, "Since we have nothing to do here anyway, why not work for the most legendary boy in Tianan City? I believe that he will treat us well." But the girls didn't expect that Li Yundong would actually treat them so well. In this day and age, it was not difficult to find a job. What was difficult was to find a satisfactory job. Like the one in front of him, he had a monthly salary of more than 5,000 yuan, and he even had such a big red packet for Chinese New Year. Moreover, the place of work was comfortable and elegant. Although he was a waitress, there was not a single troublesome customer. It was very comfortable. They also knew that some of the pretty girls they knew had already gone to sea early, joining the construction army for the prosperity of the motherland. Some of them had already changed into branded clothes and jewelry. Hanging on their necks were all glittering jewels, dazzling people's eyes and lusting their hearts. These girls also adhere to their own bottom line and principles, but even they don't know what will happen in the future. What will happen after graduation? Should he join the growing army of mistresses, or should he contribute to the service industry of the motherland? Or should he honestly find a man to marry, and then his wife and children would warm the kong, cooking oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, firewood, rice, tea, and so on. In the end, he would become a yellow-faced woman who would fight to the death with a mistress. In the end, it was all about money. If there was a decent and well-paid job, who would be willing to do those shameful things? In this world, how many women are born to be cheap? If there was enough income, who wouldn't be willing to hire a nanny? What about cooking all day and getting their face covered in oil, and in the end being disliked by their own man? If they could be financially independent and live a rich life, who would be willing to be a third party, and in the end, shamelessly fight to the death with a big boss on the street? Nowadays, the girls were more mature than the other, and more sensible than the other. Because they understood this, they cherished this job very much, and worked very hard. Especially under the management of Feng Na and Cheng Cheng, the business of desanxian gradually got on the right track. Unlike before when Su Chan took the little foxes, there were no rules, just like a group of grassroots teams. They were beautiful, but when they were asked to serve people, it was really unprofessional. They did whatever they wanted, and they didn't look like a regular army at all. At present, Feng Na and Cheng Cheng had specified detailed and strict rules, and the girls were very obedient. They were all dressed in white cheongsams with hairpin flowers, and the slits on both sides of the big skirt reached the waist. With every step they took, the big white skirt was revealed, which was very attractive. The girls took a lot of money and were willing to work. When they saw people, they showed their 8 teeth. Their sweet and sincere smiles dazzled people's eyes and warmed their hearts. It made the guests feel that even if the tea here was not delicious, they were willing to come here and enjoy the atmosphere here. It could be said that these people had officially put desanxian on the right track, and it no longer relied on some gimmicks to operate. Whether it was gimmicks or flowers, they could only operate for a while, but the regular system and regular personnel were the way to operate for a long time. What kind of person was Li Yundong? Naturally, he saw the change in desanxian at a glance, so he did not hesitate to announce this decision. When the girls heard Li Yundong's words, they immediately set up a temple for Li Yundong and burned incense and worshipped Buddha every day. One by one, they cheered, and their delicate voices shook the sky, attracting the attention of the few pedestrians on the pedestrian street. Although Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin felt that Li Yundong's decision was a little abrupt and a little anxious, they were very understanding and did not oppose it. Moreover, when they saw the girls smiling from the bottom of their hearts, they also felt warm in their hearts. It could be said that they had released a lot of their suppressed feelings these days. Zhou Qin walked to Li Yundong's side and asked the girls, "What about your studies?" Some of the more courageous girls said carelessly, "With such a good job, as long as we can do it for a long time, why do we still need to go to school? What kind of crap are we learning in school? How many of us will be able to use it after we leave school?" Immediately, a girl echoed, "Yes, yes, Boss Lee, we should learn from you. Didn't you also drop out of school halfway and start a business from scratch? We will follow you." The girls giggled, but some of the more mature ones just smiled and did not say anything. Presumably, they still thought that studies were more important. In their opinion, this job was indeed good. But what if the tea house collapsed in the future? Or what if Li Yundong did not care about them? Then what would they do? The weather was unpredictable, and people could have misfortunes and blessings. It was better to have some proof. Li Yundong glanced around and saw the attitude of the girls. He couldn't help laughing, waved his hand and said, "Don't learn from me. I'm not a good example. If you want to finish your studies, I won't stop you. In the future, when you finish your studies, if you want to come here, I will wait for you. Personally, I don't encourage you to take a break from school to work here. I think if you have some easy courses, you can choose to work here when you are free. You can go back when you are free. Then you can take turns to work here. Isn't this the best of both worlds?" Hearing this, the girls were all overjoyed. They could not wait to hug Li Yundong and give him 2 bites. Of course, they could only think about this in their hearts. Which girl didn't want to be Li Yundong's real girlfriend? But the girl named Su Chan was so beautiful and charming that it made people feel inferior. Even a blind man could see how much Li Yundong doted on her. And these days, they had heard from Feng Na and Cheng Cheng that Li Yundong was faithful to his love, which made them sigh. In today's world, where could there be such a good man? Since Li Yundong was a gentleman, they couldn't let him look at them. Therefore, the girls were very reserved. After Li Yundong announced the good news, the little foxes immediately rushed over and looked at Li Yundong pitifully. Ling Yu, in particular, took Li Yundong's hand and said with a wronged expression, "Boss, you don't want us anymore, do you?" Li Yundong asked curiously, "Where did this come from?" Ling Yu said pitifully, "You've turned all of them into regular customers. What should we do?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Nonsense. You've been showing off all day long. Don't you feel ashamed? I feel ashamed for you. Don't make trouble. I won't give you any less money in the future. Just stay at home. When the little foxes heard this, their eyes lit up. I won't give you any less pocket money? The only thing the little foxes cared about was whether their pocket money would be less or not. As for whether they would work or not, that was secondary. If they could stay at home all day long, cultivating, watching soap operas, and spending money at the same time, why couldn't they live such a life? Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at these greedy foxes. He poked their heads one by one with his fingers and said, "Well, go do what you need to do." The little foxes dispersed in an uproar. Some picked up the paper flowers they had prepared and scattered them high. Some held up poles and shook the firecrackers on them. Some lit incense sticks and covered their ears with their hands while lighting the firecrackers hanging high on the poles. It was a bustling and lively scene. Li Yundong turned his head and saw Su-chan looking at them enviously. Her eyes flashed. Li Yundong gently pushed her and whispered, "If you want to play, go and play." Su-chan looked back at Li Yundong and said tentatively, "Can I?" Li Yundong nodded with a smile. Only then did Su-chan break into a smile and sneak into the crowd. Although Su-chan had been a little depressed these days because of Ao Wushuang, it was the Spring Festival, and there was a festive and peaceful atmosphere everywhere. She couldn't help but be happy with the little foxes. She took the little foxes to hold a string of firecrackers and hang them high at the entrance of the shop. She took a lit incense candle handed by the little fox and lit the fuse of the firecrackers with the flame in front of her. As soon as she lit it, the fuse began to burn, and a thunderous sound of firecrackers suddenly rang out. Although she was used to the scene of fighting, the amazing sound of the firecrackers still made the little girl a little unable to stand it. She covered her ears and hid aside, grinning. The little foxes also covered their ears and laughed at the crackling firecrackers. Some of them were talking loudly, but the loud sound of the firecrackers made it difficult for them to hear each other clearly even when they were talking face to face. But after a while, the girls of Tiannan University and the little foxes in the shop all shouted, "It's the Spring Festival! Happy New Year!" The girls' voices were neat and crisp, but even the deafening sound of firecrackers could not cover them up. They floated up to the sky and did not dissipate for a long time. There was a mistake in yesterday's update. I typed one more word. It should be that South Korea and other countries are still celebrating the Spring Festival. And I typed one more word in the question of the mystical silver fox with mystical luck. The meaning is completely different. It's really a mistake. I'm ashamed. Thank you for pointing it out. Chapter 821. A group of girls were having a good time at the entrance of the Desanxian Gate. This street had almost become their territory. On weekdays, this street was full of tourists. Even after 9 o'clock in the evening, there was still a sea of people, jostling each other's shoulders. How could it be as empty as it was today, where horses could run? These days, the little foxes had been cooped up at home for a long time. After coming out, they were like prisoners, laughing wildly. They were all teenage girls, and this time they were having fun. The street was really full of them, especially some little girls who were holding firecrackers and setting them off, laughing so hard that their noses and eyes disappeared. Li Yundong and the others didn't know what they were so happy about, but they were all having fun. In particular, the little foxes were having a lot of fun. Some of them simply played some tricks, such as turning into some small objects or playing some camouflage. The girls of Tiannan University stared at them with their eyes wide open, thinking that they were all female versions of Lu Qian. The little foxes were having a good time, but Su-chan still couldn't play. She looked at the little foxes playing. Although there was a smile on her face, there was still some depression between her brows. She was in a daze when she suddenly felt that someone was standing beside her. Su-chan turned her head and saw that Li Yundong was looking at her with a smile. "Are you still thinking about your master?" Su-chan shook her head with a sweet smile and said, "No, I'm wondering if anyone will come to pay us a New Year's visit today." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "Don't think about it. We have so many enemies now. It's good enough that they don't come to make trouble for us." Su-chan pouted. She put her arm around Li Yundong and said with a sigh, "Yundong, do you think I'm too greedy?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "What's wrong?" Su-chan raised her head, looked at him, and said, "In the past, when we were at our poorest, I thought that it would be good to have a place to live. But then the house we lived in got bigger and better, and I thought if we could only earn a little more money for ourselves.
Now that we have started to make money, I hope that more and more people will come to congratulate us, praise us, and especially I hope that they will all recognize you as an indomitable hero.
That would be great. Tell me, am I being too greedy? Li Yundong laughed. Who cares what others think? As long as you're happy now, isn't that good?
Xueqi looked at him in a daze and shook her head.
No, my biggest hope is to see you become a great hero.
This is also the vow I made at the beginning.
Nouch. I think you are already one, but I don't know what other people think. Li Yundong pinched the tip of the little girl's nose affectionately. If you think I am, then I am. Who cares what others do?
Xueqi shook her head.
It's not that simple.
How many people in this world can ignore what other people think?
The little girl had been thinking a lot these days.
She had become more and more aware that the Fox Zen sect was a heavy burden to Li Yundong.
Li Yundong could have become a great hero in the Chinese cultivation world, but because of the Fox Zen sect, his reputation had been more or less affected. Many cultivators of all sects were unwilling to admit that the person in charge of the Fox Zen sect was a great hero. This thought had been entangled in the little girl's heart for a long time, and it made her more and more unhappy. The little girl pouted, lowered her head, and muttered with flagging interest, "It's all our fault. Otherwise, why didn't anyone come to visit us during the new year?"
Li Yundong looked at her, and for some reason, his heart ached a little. He smiled, winked at Xueqi, and said, "Don't be sad. Watch me perform a magic trick, and in a while, a lot of people will come to pay their New Year's greetings."
Do you believe me?
Xueqi knew that Li Yundong was spoiling her, and she couldn't help but feel warm in her heart. The little girl lowered her head, and there was a faint smile on the corner of her mouth. She shook her head gently and said, "I don't believe it." Li Yundong chuckled and took out a purple three-legged cauldron from his arms. He said in a loud voice, "Boys, come here." When the little foxes heard Li Yundong's call, they all shouted and ran toward him. When Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin saw him with his hands on his hips and his arms raised, these little demons immediately gathered together. This situation was really like a scene from the Journey to the West. Zi Yuan couldn't help but tease him. "Are you the Golden Horn King or the Silver Horn King?" Li Yundong laughed and raised the tripod in his hand.
"I'm the three-legged king."
Zhou Qin didn't know what to think of, but her expression was a little strange. She couldn't help glancing at Li Yundong's lower body.
The three-legged king?
Li Yundong saw that her expression was strange, and the corners of her mouth seemed to be holding back a smile. Especially when he saw that her eyes kept sweeping over his lower body. He glared at her and said, "What are you thinking about?"
"It's the new year. Can you stop thinking about it?" Zhou Qin quickly turned her face away.
When she turned her face again, her face was already serious. Li Yundong turned his head to Feng Na and said, "Bring the best tea in our shop." Feng Na saw that Li Yundong was holding a three-legged purple copper cauldron in his hand. The copper cauldron was beautifully carved from top to bottom, like an antique. At first glance, she could tell that it was not an ordinary item. Although she didn't know what Li Yundong was going to do, she quickly turned into the back room, took out a beautiful ceramic jar, and took out a small bag of tea from it. She smiled and said, "This is the new Mount Huangshan. Although it's not as good as the one in Zi Yuan's collection, it's still top grade. It costs more than 1,000 taels." Li Yundong smiled and took the tea in her hand. He poured all the tea into the tripod, and then asked her to fetch water. After a while, Feng Na brought clean water and handed it to Li Yundong. Li Yundong casually poured the cold water into the tripod. At this time, Feng Na, Cheng, and the girls working in the shop all looked at Li Yundong curiously, not knowing what he was going to do. Some of the girls had specially learned a lot of tea-making skills in the past few days, so they more or less knew some methods and processes of tea-making. When they saw Li Yundong's behavior, they felt that it was really a bit of a waste of the top-grade Mount Huangshan. But since Li Yundong was the boss, and he had made a big profit before, naturally no one had any doubts. Only Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and other cultivators vaguely understood what Li Yundong was going to do. At this time, Li Yundong smiled and blinked at Xueqi, saying, "Watch carefully. I'm sure someone will come to pay us a New Year's greeting later." Xueqi also somewhat guessed what Li Yundong was going to do. She looked at Li Yundong curiously and pursed her lips into a smile.
"Really?"
Li Yundong chuckled and stood up in the hall on the first floor. He held the three-legged copper tripod with both hands, and the zhenqi in his body surged secretly. The Xueqi in his palm gradually rose, and after a while, the tripod began to emit bursts of white smoke. As soon as the white smoke came out, a fragrant smell immediately came into the tea house. Everyone was shocked. The girls and the little foxes couldn't help but exclaim, "Oh, why is it so fragrant? This is the fragrance of Mount Huangshan." But soon, one of them shook her head and said, "No, it's even more fragrant than Mount Huangshan. I've never smelled anything so fragrant." The fragrance of Mount Huang was light and elegant, with an ethereal air. It was said to be an immortal tea. The king cauldron was the personal magic weapon of Sun Simiao, the Tang dynasty's medical sage. For more than 1,000 years, it was unknown how many miraculous elixirs had been cooked in the cauldron. Although these miraculous elixirs had long been out of the furnace, most of the residual fragrance remained in the cauldron. Besides, after 1,000 years of edification and countless elixirs, even a stubborn stone could be smoked into an immortal stone, let alone a psychic magic weapon. The zhenqi in Li Yundong's body was the rare yuanyang qi of a boy in the world. In terms of purity, it was unparalleled in the world. He mobilized his zhenqi to roast the tripod, and the fragrance of the tripod, as well as the fragrance of the tea of Mount Huangshan, were immediately released. When these scents blended together, it was really a strange fragrance, which was shocking. Everyone saw that the tea in the tripod in Li Yundong's hand was not boiling, but there was a steady stream of white smoke coming out. This white smoke rose and slowly condensed into a white mist, and then spread out in all directions and out of the tea house. Today was the first day of the new year, and few people went shopping at this time, and many shops were closed. But not all shops were closed, and there were people on the pedestrian street. When the customers in these shops smelled the fragrance, they were shocked. Their nostrils twitched, and they exclaimed, "It's so fragrant, so fragrant. Where does this fragrance come from? Why is it so fragrant?" This smell was not only fragrant, but after smelling it, they felt refreshed, their limbs were light, and their internal organs seemed to be much more comfortable, just like the qi of an immortal. Some people immediately followed the fragrance. After a while, all the tourists on the pedestrian street were alarmed by the fragrance and came to the Desangxian with curiosity and shock. At first, these people were only in twos and threes, but gradually, more and more people gathered together like a flood. Even some shop owners and shop assistants were tempted by the fragrance. They closed their shops one after another and followed the crowd curiously. This group of people followed the fragrance to the Desangxian. When they fixed their eyes on it, they saw that the antique tea house with flying eaves and arches was shrouded in a cloud of white mist, as if it was a fairyland on earth. At this time, coupled with the strange fragrance, which was intoxicating, they were all shocked. Some people who had never been here could not help but exclaim, "There is such a place on the pedestrian street? What kind of place is this?" Some people who knew immediately became curious. "Hey, you don't know, right? This is the most popular tea house in Tiannan City now. It's called the Desangxian. The tea inside is fragrant and good, and the tea attendants are beautiful and docile." Tut tut. Those who had not seen the tea attendants in the Desangxian did not think much of these beautiful tea attendants for a while. They only felt the fragrance coming from the tea house, and they all thought at the same time, "After drinking the tea in this tea house, will I become an immortal? Even if I can't become an immortal, it must be good to prolong my life." Immediately, some tourists shouted, "This tea house is open today. Let's go and get some tea." The crowd suddenly burst into laughter and rushed to the entrance of the Desangxian. They rushed to the entrance, only to see a handsome man standing at the entrance, holding a three-legged bronze tripod in his hands, looking at them with a smile. This man had an extraordinary bearing. Although he did not say a word, he had a different kind of majesty, so they did not dare to offend him easily. For a moment, the noisy street became quiet. Many people were shocked by Li Yundong's majesty and didn't know what to say for a while, but some people hid in the crowd and said boldly, "Boss, Happy New Year. What's so fragrant? Is it tea? Can you share a cup with us?" With someone taking the lead, everyone immediately followed suit. They all said with a smile, "Yes, Happy New Year. Let's have a cup of tea." Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh. He turned to Su Chan and blinked. "Did you see that? Are there a lot of people coming to pay us a New Year's greeting?" Chapter 822. Hearing Li Yundong's words, Many people understood that Li Yundong had made such a big noise just to make Su Chan happy. Except for Li Yundong, the rest of the Desanxian were all women. They all looked at Su Chan enviously, wishing that there was such a man who could coax and pamper them like this. Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin looked at each other and shook their heads in their hearts. Zhou Qin felt a little sour in her heart, so she changed the topic and whispered, "This is a good opportunity for publicity." However, Zi Yuan fixed her eyes on Li Yundong and said, "If he becomes the emperor, he must be a guy like King Yu of Zhou. In order to make a girl happy, he can also do things like burning a beacon to tease the feudal vassals." Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong and sighed faintly. "Yes, but who is Bao Si?" Zi Yuan immediately glanced at Zhou Qin and felt a little strange in her heart. Meishi in the Xia dynasty, Daji in the Shang dynasty, Bao Si in the Zhou dynasty, and Li Ji in the spring and autumn period were the four great foxes recognized by China since ancient times. They were also known as the Four Enchantresses. Zhou Qin's words were very appropriate for the occasion and had a deep meaning. Zhou Qin saw Zi Yuan looking at her meaningfully, and she also came to her senses. She quickly waved her hand and said, "I just said it casually. I don't mean anything else. Don't think too much about it." Zi Yuan smiled and didn't say anything. She just thought to herself, "I hope Zhou Qin's words don't come true." At this time, there was a lot of noise outside the tea house. These people were all attracted by the strange fragrance and wanted to ask for a cup of tea. Li Yundong turned his head and said to Su Chan with a smile, "Do you want to give it to me?" When Su Chan saw that Li Yundong had made such a big noise for her, she felt really sweet in her heart. She was moved and guilty at the same time. She said with some fear, "Yundong, this is not good, is it?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "What's wrong with it? Nothing is more important than your happiness." Su Chan's eyes were immediately filled with tears. She stared at Li Yundong and didn't know what to say. Li Yundong looked at Su Chan gently and said with a smile, "Don't be silly. Say something. We're all waiting for you." Only then did Su Chan wipe her tears and break into a smile. Of course. It's the new year today." Li Yundong chuckled and turned to Feng Na. "Set up a long table and bring a row of teacups." Feng Na glanced at Su Chan enviously, then turned around and left. At this time, the girls in the shop did not wait for her instructions. One by one, they put the tea table together and placed small teacups on it. Li Yundong held the Medicine King tripod with one hand, tilted it slightly, and poured the tea in the tripod into the teacup. Everyone could see that the copper tripod in his hand weighed at least 20 to 30 kilograms, but Li Yundong lifted it with one hand as if it were light. Although he was pouring tea at an angle, and there was no spout on the tripod stove, he did not spill a drop of water on the table, showing his extremely brilliant kung fu. The people outside the building were all amateurs of cultivation. Although they couldn't understand Li Yundong's kung fu, as the saying goes, amateurs were just watching the fun. Li Yundong poured the tea in a row, and his movements were as smooth as flowing water. There was no delay at all, and he was extremely elegant. The crowd suddenly cheered, and Li Yundong also said with a smile, "Come on, everyone has a cup. Everyone who sees it has a share." The girls of Desanxian, who had just turned into the official members, immediately carried tea trays and brought tea to the crowd. All of them were smiling and talking. The delicate fragrance of the girls seemed to blend with the fragrance of the tea, making people more and more intoxicated. After everyone took the teacups, they saw that they were the smallest teacups, which could only hold one tael of tea at most. It was okay to take a sip, but if they were thirsty and drank it all at once, it would not be enough to quench their thirst. However, there was a faint green color in the clear tea, which made people think that it was immortal tea. Some people couldn't bear it and didn't care about their faces. They raised their heads and drank the tea as if they were drinking white wine. Although the amount was small, the tea was made with Huangshan Maofeng as a guide, and Li Yundong used his boy Yuanyang Qi to drive the Medicine King tripod to refine it. Among the three, although the high-grade Huangshan Maofeng could be bought, Li Yundong's boy Yuanyang Qi and the peerless immortal Qi of the Medicine King tripod could not be bought with money. When the three of them were combined into one, the tea that was brewed was truly wondrous. It was equivalent to everyone taking a miraculous elixir. As soon as some people drank it, they immediately felt that the tea was comfortable and refreshing in their throats. A strange force spread around their bodies, making their limbs light, their minds clear, and their bodies light, as if they were going to float like immortals. Some people had a big reaction and couldn't help but burst into tears. They immediately choked and said, "This is really immortal tea. I've never drunk such delicious tea." Those who hadn't drunk the tea looked at these people with tears streaming down their faces in surprise, as if they were looking at crazy people. They said, F***CK, is it so exaggerated? They immediately squeezed to the front, stretched out their arms and shouted, "I want to drink it too, I want to drink it too." For a moment, the entrance of the Desanxian was crowded, and the deserted streets suddenly became crowded. Feng Na saw so many people crowded at the door, all stretching out their arms and shouting. It was really noisy, and their arms were like a forest. She was a little stunned. Even when the business of the Desanxian was at its best, there had never been such a scene. She had only seen such a scene in some large supermarkets when there was a discount. A group of people, men and women, old and young, were squeezing in like a suicide squad. But the situation in front of her was even more exaggerated than that of a supermarket. No matter how much discount the supermarket offered, it would still cost money. But right now it was free. Although there were many tea shops these days that invited beautiful tea waitresses to serve passers-by on the road with tea trays, those fragrant tea were good, but how could they have such a magical effect? Just smelling it made them feel refreshed, as if they were a few years younger. Although they didn't know the origin of the tripod in Li Jiandong's hand, nor did they know who he was, they only felt that such immortal tea could not be drunk even if they spent money on it. If they didn't take advantage of this opportunity to have a good taste today, wouldn't it be a great loss? After drinking the tea, some of these people opened their mouths and praised him. Even if some people were rebellious in their hearts and wanted to express different feelings from the others, after drinking this cup of tea, their minds immediately became gloomy and their bodies became tipsy. It was as if they had been reborn. Their ears and eyes were sharp, and they were in high spirits. Even if they had 100 complaints in their hearts, they were too embarrassed to go against their conscience and say such things. After drinking the tea, the praise spread. Some people even immediately picked up their mobile phones and told their families to come here quickly to taste the rare immortal tea in this world. Some people who hadn't drunk the tea were so anxious that they jumped up and down and raised their arms high, for fear that the tea waitress would miss them. As they jumped, they squeezed to the front, making the group of people at the door like a torrent, wave after wave. Seeing that the group of people at the door refused to leave after drinking the tea, Feng Na looked at Li Jiandong eagerly, hoping that he would give them another cup of tea. More people rushed over after hearing the news, blocking the street tightly. The scene was much more lively than when the Desanxian opened for business. At this time, there was such a big noise on the pedestrian street. It didn't take long for the police of the security team to arrive. They originally wanted to disperse the crowd, but when they saw Li Yundong in the crowd, someone immediately recognized him. F***CK. Isn't that the one in that community? Li Yundong asked. Even Chief Gong is very polite to him. Normally, if someone had made such a scene, the police of the Public Security Brigade might have rushed over, arrested him first, and then sued him for disturbing public order and affecting social order. They would have fined him thousands of yuan. But they recognized that Li Jiandong was in the scene, so no one dared to move. They had to obediently maintain order outside. Then, the reporters of the TV station also came after hearing the news. They wanted to squeeze in, but there was a sea of people here. It was difficult to even stick a needle in, let alone a person. If a burly man tried to squeeze in, he would be squeezed into the air with just a lift of his feet, unable to fall to the ground. The reporters of the TV station looked at the scene in front of them and immediately gasped. What's going on? Isn't this too exaggerated? But after smelling the fragrance of the tea, they felt that the situation seemed to be reasonable. They also wanted to squeeze in and have a cup to see what kind of magic this tea that could make everyone crazy was. These reporters couldn't squeeze into the crowd, so they had to set up cameras outside to report the grand occasion here. Imperceptibly, they had made a big free advertisement for Desanxian. Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others saw that Li Jiandong's playful act could cause such a sensation. They couldn't help but look at each other, sigh, and shake their heads with a smile. The girls in the shop were even more admiring. They thought that this was a deliberate move by Li Jiandong. He could please his girlfriend and promote the tea house at the same time. It was really killing two birds with one stone. On the first day of the new year, he could think of such a way in a flash. No wonder he was the boss and they were waiters. Li Jiandong saw that the crowd was getting more and more crowded. It was obvious that there were more monks than porridge, and more people than tea. He raised his hands and said, "Everyone, don't push. It's useless. There's only so much tea today. If you want to drink such immortal tea in the future, come to Desanxian. We will welcome you with open hands. Everyone go back." The crowd suddenly sighed, and there was a lot of sorrow. Some people cursed unwillingly, while others immediately asked when the Desanxian would open and what the price of the tea was. They secretly made up their minds that they must come early tomorrow to drink this immortal tea. After Li Jiandong finished speaking, he turned around and went back to the tea house, but many people gathered in the tea house and refused to leave. They kept asking if the tea house would open today. Li Jiandong smiled and said, "It's not open today. Please go back and come back early tomorrow morning." Immediately, an old man asked, "How early do you want?" Li Jiandong chuckled and said, "Daybreak." Unexpectedly, the old man said, "Then I'll sleep here. I won't leave." The crowd burst into laughter. Someone made fun of him and said, "You're crazy. It's winter, but you're sleeping on the floor just to drink a cup of tea. Is it worth it?" However, the old man's eyes widened. He pointed to himself and said, "After drinking this tea just now, my eyes immediately lit up. My chest was tight and I was short of breath. My joints hurt, and I even trembled when I walked. But after drinking this cup of tea, my eyes immediately lit up. My chest was no longer tight, I was no longer short of breath, and my joints didn't hurt anymore." As he said this, he stamped his feet hard and said, "Now I feel full of strength, as if I'm 10 years younger. I spent a lot of money to treat my illnesses, but I didn't expect that I would be cured after drinking a cup of tea in Desanxian. Do you think it's worth it for me to stay here for the whole night?" Some of the crowd laughed and said, "It's worth it, of course it's worth it." There were also people who had not drunk the tea who shouted, "You must be a shill. Don't say it, how could it be so exaggerated? Who would believe it?" The old man suddenly became furious. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly heard the voice of a healthy old man not far away. "I believe it." Hearing this, everyone turned their heads and saw an old man with an extraordinary bearing standing outside the crowd. He was said to be an old man because his hair was white. But judging from his appearance, his eyes were sharp and full of spirit, and he looked like a middle-aged man. A knowledgeable reporter was shocked when he saw the old man. "It's him? Why is he here?" Chapter 823. This old man was none other than the tyrant of Tiannan City, Chen Wankai. Ever since he had been accepted as a disciple by Li Yundong, his health and mood had improved day by day. Moreover, Li Xiaoxian's health had improved greatly, and Shen Hui had also withstood his test. It seemed that she was a successor who could be entrusted with heavy responsibilities. The pain of losing his son slowly faded away in Chen Wansai's heart, replaced by a strong desire to seek immortality. Especially after Chen Wankai carried out some basic breathing exercises according to Li Yundong's method. He found that his body was indeed getting more and more nourished. His muscles and bones were getting stronger and stronger, and his spirit, qi, and spirit had become much more abundant. Sometimes he walked as if he were flying, just like a young man. Chen Wankai had originally wanted to visit Li Yundong's house early in the morning and wish him a happy new year. However, when he arrived early in the morning, Li Yundong was no longer at home, and there was no one in the rooms on either side. Chen Wankai thought for a while and thought that Li Yundong and the others must be at Desanxian. Otherwise, it would be impossible for no one to be there. So he turned around and took Shen Hui, who had come with him, straight to Desanxian. As soon as they arrived at Desanxian, Chen Wankai and Shen Hui saw a dense crowd of people. It was a sea of people, which was scary to look at. They were all shocked. It was not until they heard Li Yundong's clear voice coming from the crowd that they knew what had happened. Chen Wankai had been in the business world for many years. With just a glance, he saw the benefits of this matter. He thought that Li Yundong had done it on purpose. He secretly admired him in his heart, so he smiled and said to Shen Hui, "Fortunately, my young master was not born a few years earlier." Shen Hui was also in a good mood these days. When she saw her father's rare smile, she asked, "Why did you say that he was not born a few years earlier?" Chen Wankai laughed and said, "If he had been born a few years earlier, there would have been no chance for me to make a name for myself in the business world." Shen Hui smiled. There are different levels of knowledge and different professions. Everyone has their own talents. Chen Wankai glanced at her and suddenly asked, "Do you think there's anything my master can't do?" Shen Hui was speechless when she heard that. She thought about it carefully. Ever since she got to know this guy, it seemed that nothing was difficult for him. During the tea art competition, she had set him up, but this guy was still able to break free from the trap, pull a tooth out of a tiger's mouth, and take first place. Shen Hui thought about this and couldn't help but sigh. Sigh, people can't be compared with each other. Chen Wankai chuckled, as if he was extremely proud of his own judgment. After Lin Miao and Chen Wankai greeted each other, Chen Wankai politely greeted the people in the shop one by one. Then he said to Li Yunyang with a smile, "Master, there's no hurry to drink tea. Let me make it clear to this person first." As he said this, he turned to the person who had said that he didn't believe that Li Yunyang's tea had magical effects and said, "I guess you don't know me, but it doesn't matter. Last year, when I participated in the Tea Culture Art Challenge tournament in Donggu City, do you know who won first place?" Everyone asked curiously, "Who was it? It can't be this male boss, right?" Chen Wankai smiled slightly, pointed to Zi Yuan beside him, and said with a smile, "No, it's this one. This is a fairy in the world. Her tea art is extraordinary." At that time, 8 immortals crossed the sea at the same time and won first place. But even such a fairy doesn't dare to say that she can make such immortal tea. "Fairy Zi Yuan, is it true or not?" Zi Yuan knew that Chen Wankai wanted to build momentum for his master, so he used her as a foil. She smiled cooperatively and said concisely yes. Everyone saw that Zi Yuan was an outstanding beauty. She stood there as if she was going to fly away with the wind and become an immortal. She was really full of the charm of an immortal, and her every move was full of the demeanor of a goddess. Although it was just a word, it had a kind of incomparably convincing power, and people couldn't help but believe it. The person who had questioned them before was shocked by the temperament of Zi Yuan and Chen Wankai. Even if he was dissatisfied, he couldn't say anything at this time, but his eyes were still full of doubts. Chen Wankai smiled and said to Zi Yuan, "Fairy Zi Yuan, would you like to show off your skills?" Zi Yuan smiled gently and glanced at Li Yundong. "With Zhenren Li here, how dare I show off my slight skill in front of an expert?" Chen Wankai then said to Li Yundong, "Master, can you show off your skills in front of everyone today and let us broaden our horizons?" Li Yundong took a deep look at Chen Wankai, hesitated for a moment, then nodded with a smile and said, "Okay." Compared with Zi Yuan, his tea art was definitely on the ground and in the sky. They were not on the same level at all, but if it was just to concoct some spectacular and magical scenes, Zi Yuan was not as good as him. At this time, Li Yundong placed the Medicine King tripod on the tea table. He pressed one hand on one side of the copper tripod and the other on the Medicine King tripod, silently activating the Xueqi in his body. Everyone saw that the white mist in the Medicine King tripod suddenly changed from an irregular cloud to a tangible shape. Slowly, they recognized that there was a faintly moving dragon in the white mist. This dragon had a nose, eyes and beard, and if they got close enough, they could even see the scales on it. Some people who saw it clearly couldn't help but exclaim, "Damn, is it a dragon? No way." At this time, more and more people saw it clearly and exclaimed one after another. The reporters of the TV station also looked at the scene in front of them with their mouths agape and tongue-tied. For a moment, they forgot to take a picture. After a while, they regretted it and turned on the camera. Li Yunyang controlled the divine dragon to fly back and forth in the fog. Sometimes it rolled through the white fog that surrounded the beams, and sometimes it twisted the universe in the Medicine King tripod that was rolling in the white fog. Everyone was stunned, dazzled, and speechless for a long time. The crowd watched as the indistinct dragon swam around for a while before it suddenly drilled into the many teacups on the tea table. With a whoosh, the dragon instantly turned into countless wisps of white mist and dissipated into the tea in the cups. Those who were close by gathered their courage and came forward to take a look. They saw that the tea in the teacups were rippling, as if a divine dragon had just drilled into it. If Li Yundong explained the effects and characteristics of these teas to them, no one would believe him. However, after he pretended to be mysterious, everyone immediately believed him and determined that this tea was immortal tea. This time, De Sanxian was even more shocked. Those who had not left immediately felt extremely lucky. Fortunately, they had not left. Otherwise,
How could they have seen such a wonderful scene? At this time, everyone was scrambling to have a taste of this tea, but Shen Wankai turned to Li Yundong and said, Master, please let me say a few words, can you? Li Yundong smiled and said, Old Shen, please. Shen Wankai nodded, turned around and said loudly, Don't rush, everyone. Answer my question first. If you answer it, everyone will have a share of this tea. When everyone heard this, they calmed down a little and pricked up their ears to listen to him. Shen Wankai raised a cup of tea and said loudly, Everyone, what kind of tea is this? Whoever can answer it, let him drink a cup. For a moment, everyone was talking at once. Some said that it was Tai Ping Monkey King, some said that it was Tai Guanyin, and some said that it was West Lake Longjing. There were many different opinions, but Shen Wankai kept shaking his head with a smile. Even when someone said that this tea was Huangshan Maofeng, he just smiled and said nothing. For a moment, Li Yundong, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the others didn't know what he was up to. They all looked at each other. However, Shen Hui understood Shen Wansai's thoughts. She suddenly shouted, This is the best tea in the world. Her voice was not loud in the crowd, but a clever person next to her heard it and immediately shouted, This is the best tea in the world. Shen Wankai immediately brought the tea to the person and said with a smile, By the way, please have some tea. The crowd burst into an uproar and said one after another, Shameless, this doesn't count. However, Shen Wankai said loudly, Everyone, isn't this the best tea in the world? Everyone laughed and said, Of course it is. Shen Wankai smiled and said, Then what is the best tea house in the world? Everyone understood and answered with a smile, It's the best tea house in the world. Shen Wankai laughed and said, Good, good. The best tea house in the world. Come on, let's drink tea. Only then did everyone burst into laughter and come up to get tea. Li Yundong looked at Shen Wankai with a smile. After he turned around, he shook his head and said, Old Shen, you're bragging a little too much. The best tea house in the world? If others hear it, I'm afraid they will laugh at us. However, Shen Wankai smiled, bowed slightly, and said, Master, let's make this Desanxian tea house the best in the world. Then no one will laugh at us, right? Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he fixed his eyes on Shen Wankai. After a while, he reached out to hold Shen Wankai and said slowly, Well, then let's work together to make Desanxian the best tea house in the world. Shen Wankai was overjoyed. He held Li Yundong's hand tightly with both hands, shook it hard, and said in a genteel manner, I dare not to follow your orders. The young and old looked at each other and smiled without saying anything. Chapter 824. That night, when some evening news on the TV station broadcasted the amazing spectacle of the opening of Desanxian in the new year, Desanxian became popular, and so did the title of the world's #1 tea house. A tea drinking trend was set off in Tiannan City. For a time, almost every household took tea drinking as a fashion and talked about Desanxian as a trending topic. Even many wealthy businessmen in the surrounding cities were alarmed and specially drove to Desanxian in Tiannan City to buy first-grade immortal tea. Bubble. Book. Although the Japanese had driven the business of Desanxian to boom, Li Yundong, Feng Na, and the others knew very well that it was impossible for the Japanese to visit Desanxian from thousands of miles away all the time. Even if the Yamaguchi people were devout, they also had to support their families. The people who mingled in the underworld also had to earn hard-earned money. No family had much spare money. It was already pious enough for them to come all the way to the immovable Wisdom King's shop to drink tea and worship the gods. They couldn't destroy their homes to worship Buddha. How many Japanese tourists came to China every year? There were only tens of thousands of Yamaguchi people in Japan. Those who could afford to come were 1 in 100, and these Japanese tourists who came to Tiannan City were 1 in 1,000. Therefore, if they only relied on the Japanese to support the business and financial resources of Desanxian, it would not be a long-term solution. Therefore, they could only tap into the market in Tiannan City. On a whim, Li Yundong inadvertently created a huge gimmick. With the secret help of all kinds of opportunities and various forces, Desanxian's reputation rose. It was no longer limited to the pedestrian street. For a time, it became a household name in Tiannan City, known to all women and children. At this time, Li Yundong also knew that the expansion plan of Desanxian had matured, and they could take a step forward.
This was just a small step, and they had only opened another branch in Tiannan City. For the time being, Su Chan and the little foxes would be in charge of it. But everything was difficult at the beginning. The first branch had been opened, and the second and third branches would probably appear soon in the future. In the end, Desanxian would go out of the country and go to the world. There was an effect in the business world called the snowball effect or the flywheel effect. It referred to the accumulation of capital at the beginning. The accumulation of capital was the most difficult. It was like a person spinning a huge roulette. At the beginning, it was extremely strenuous and exhausting. However, once the difficulty of the initial stage was over, the snowball would roll bigger and bigger, thus creating a huge inertia. The flywheel would also roll faster and faster, and the person pushing it would save more and more effort. In the end, there was no need to push it at all, and it would spin quickly on its own. This was the nature of capital interests. It would constantly look for fresh blood to strengthen itself. Just like what Zhou Qin had said to Ding Nan in the school building, "It's not that I'm vicious, but that the power behind me is too great." Power is like a beast. The stronger it is, the more it wants to eat people. The more harm anyone gives it, the greater its rebound. This is not something I can control. Everything in the world is the same. Whether it is business, politics, or cultivation, putting aside the superficial phenomenon and looking at the essence, in fact the truth is the same. This is the true meaning of all things returning to the root. As long as you master this root, no matter how dazzling or changing everything in the world is, you can never escape the essence of this root. There were a lot of people in China. Whenever a business made a little money, there would be countless people rushing into that business until the business was full. Then, there would be countless people losing everything. Only then would the jealous people calm down a little. Li Yundong's Desanxian became famous and quickly attracted the attention of the business community in Tiannan City. Although many of them knew that Li Yundong had a great background in Zhou Qin's amazing power, they did not dare to use some dirty means to deal with this business star, but they still dared to compete with him in some reasonable business competitions. Besides, the theory of capital was right. Once there was a proper profit, capital would be bold. If there was a 10% profit, it would be guaranteed to be used everywhere. If there was a 20% profit, it would be active. If there was a 50% profit, it would be desperate. If there was a 100% profit, it would be able to trample on all human laws. If there was a 300% profit, it would dare to commit any crime, even at the risk of being hanged. When Li Yundong opened the first tea shop of Desanxian, he had invested no more than 1 million yuan in the beginning. But in less than a month, his turnover almost broke through an astonishing 8 figures. Even after deducting the labor costs and costs, the profit was as high as an astonishing 800%. Such a sudden appearance of a high-profit industry instantly made many businessmen dizzy. Soon, many tea houses imitating Desanxian began to appear one by one. Some people were even like Zhao Yuzhen, setting up a tea house in front of the branch of Desanxian and fighting in the arena. All kinds of tea art activities were held in the city all day long. Some exaggerated ones even had clones of names. For a time, Tian San Xian, Di San Xian, and so on swarmed up. It was really chaotic, which made Li Yundong, Su Chan, and the others not know whether to laugh or cry. However, no matter how many people followed the trend and how outrageous the tricks were, none of them was Li Yundong. After all, they didn't have the Medicine King tripod, so it was impossible for them to make a mortal tea that could make people fascinated and intoxicated. Sometimes people were very stupid, but sometimes they were terrifyingly shrewd. At first, these tea houses attracted many customers with low prices and a lot of gimmicks. But after drinking a few times, they soon found out, what the hell is this? Are you kidding me? This tea is far worse than immortal tea. Although Li Yundong no longer showed his face and used the Medicine King tripod to perform tea art, he also came up with a wonderful idea. He first placed the tea leaves in the Medicine King tripod, absorbed some of the medicinal power and spiritual qi accumulated by the Medicine King tripod for thousands of years, and then sold them at a very high price. In this way, the tea house grading system that Zhou Qin had started could finally be implemented. The Desanxian began to officially introduce several modified cards, namely Human Immortal, Earth Immortal, and Fairy Immortal, which corresponded to the name of the shop. They were also divided into 3 levels. Although the consumption mode was no different from other consumption modes, after the design of Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling, the workmanship of these cards was exquisite. Even the lowest level Human Immortal card was extremely exquisite. The pattern on it was a beautiful fairy dressed in antique silk and satin, concentrating on performing tea art. At the four corners of the card were flying auspicious clouds. The colors were bright and three-dimensional. When held in the hand, it was really like a small work of art, which made people unable to put it down. With the human immortal card, it meant that the tea guests were already primary members of the Desanxian. They were qualified to enjoy most of the tea of the Desanxian and enjoy discounts. The Earth Immortal card was a valiant portrait of Lu Yu, the god of tea, with a feather fan and silk scarf. At the four corners of the card were green mountains and blue waters, full of poetry, like a beautiful picture. However, if someone looked carefully, they would find that the portrait of Lu Yu drawn by Zi Yuan was actually somewhat similar to Li Yundong. Unlike the issuance of the Human Immortal card, the Earth Immortal card could only be issued after a certain level of consumption had been accumulated. After the implementation of the card level system of the Desanxian, thousands of Human Immortal cards had been issued. There were also many wealthy businessmen who came to drink the fairy tea. In order to drink the fairy tea, they spent a lot of money and directly smashed the Human Immortal card into an Earth Immortal card. However, to their disappointment, although the Earth Immortal card could allow them to drink most of the fairy tea and enter the box on the second floor, they still could not enter the most luxurious box, the Fairy Immortal, nor could they drink the fairy tea. If they wanted to upgrade to the Fairy Immortal card, it was useless to just spend money. In order not to let the fairy tea of the Desanxian become a victim of rich businessmen showing off their wealth, and thus make the Desanxian stink of money, Li Yundong, Feng Na, and the others discussed and decided to set a consumption limit. That was, after reaching this limit, they would be qualified to apply for the Fairy Immortal card. But no matter how much money they spent, they would not be able to add more points to this person. This qualification was only one aspect. The other aspect was that they had to have some understanding of tea culture. Therefore, they had to face the questions about tea culture from the most beautiful tea lady in the tea house. Only if they could answer them could they be qualified to enter the Fairy Immortal tea house. This made these businessmen confused. This was the first time they had encountered such a thing where they couldn't get anything done with money, especially these beautiful tea ladies. The questions were not only rare, but also tricky and strange. Even the experienced tea gluttons might not know. The most important thing was that it was not easy for them to go back and figure out the problem. When they came back again, the tea lady had changed the question. This is AF * king trap. Some of the ill-tempered businessmen suddenly flew into a rage, but the tea ladies were also very professional. With smiles on their faces, they did not say a word of rebuttal. Although these businessmen were angry and depressed, they also knew the background of this tea house more or less. Naturally, they did not dare to be presumptuous. They just complained in their mouths and stomachs, and they still went back to study the knowledge of tea culture. Every time some rich businessmen returned in anger, they made up their minds not to go to this deceptive Desanxian again. However, when they saw Shan Wan Kai, who often appeared in a high-profile manner in some banquet venues, they had no choice but to go back and become students one by one. Some even specially invited a knowledgeable tea master to tutor them. What a joke! They were all so poor that they only had money left. Who didn't want to live a few more years? Who didn't want to have a healthier body? Look at Mr. Shin. Now his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. When I saw him a month ago, I thought he was going to be buried. This was all for the immortal tea. Moreover, according to Mr. Shen, he has recently been rejuvenated. The doctor said that he actually has the ability to have children again. Even the treasured saber is not old, and it is even more heroic than before. What the hell? How old is this old man Shen? How can he still carry a spear and ride a horse like this? The rich businessmen were all dumbfounded. They didn't believe it from the bottom of their hearts, but looking at Shen Wansai's extremely energetic appearance, they had no choice but to believe it. Speaking of which, cultivators all cultivated the internal organs, so the pills refined were all aimed at the internal organs, or for conditioning, nourishing, or consolidating. Sometimes, men's combat effectiveness was not strong, mostly because their bodies were deficient, and their essence, qi, blood, and qi were seriously insufficient. In the end, it led to a major deficiency of the liver and kidney, and the weakening of yang qi. Although the immortal tea was only soaked in the Medicine King tripod for a while, the spiritual qi absorbed was enough to improve the weakness of the 5 internal organs and the lack of essence, qi, and blood. Therefore, drinking the immortal tea did have such a magical effect. Especially when a rich businessman was lucky and suddenly got the answer of the tea lady. He got what he wanted and successfully upgraded to a celestial immortal card. After tasting the immortal tea smoothly, he suddenly seemed to have been reborn. That night, he went back to find his young wife and had sex with her 3 times. The next day, he was triumphant and bragged to everyone he met. Although these rich businessmen ridiculed and didn't believe it on the surface, they believed it in private. One by one, they scratched their ears and cheeks and crazily studied the tea culture. When the rich businessman, who was the first to taste the immortal tea, was about to drink it again a few days later, he was told, "Sorry, dear customer, the celestial immortal card can only be consumed once. After consuming it once, it will automatically be downgraded to an earthly immortal card. You have to answer my question again and pass before you can drink it again." At this moment, the rich businessman really burst into tears. He even had the thought of burning down the tea house. This is really too deceitful. But even though he was deceitful and angry, after crying, no matter how resentful he was, he still went back and continued to study the tea culture honestly. Especially for someone like him who had tasted the sweetness of the tea, he couldn't stop. For a time, a strange tea culture trend was set off in the upper class of Tiannan City and the surrounding cities. These rich people talked about tea when they saw people, as if they would be out of the game if they didn't talk. Under such circumstances, the Desanxian developed rapidly. After Li Yunyang and the others spent the spring festival, they soon ushered in the 2 solar terms of the spring equinox and the rain. Time passed day by day, and the date came to the most important period of the year for cultivators, the waking of insects. Chapter 825. In the inner hall of the Yin-Yang sect on Mount Wuhua. This was a huge and spacious grotto, surrounded by mahogany shelves with all kinds of books and dazzling medicine bottles. This grotto faced south and was extremely deep. It was a cultivation treasure land that Zhang Yuan had spent a lot of effort to find and build. Although there were many twists and turns inside, there was a hole in the front and 3 exits in different directions at the back. It could be said that a cunning rabbit had 3 burrows. The front and back of this grotto were ventilated, and there was a natural hole above it. This hole almost went straight to the top of the mountain, where the blue sky could be seen with the naked eye. Moreover, Zhang Yuan had set up a sophisticated magic circle on the hole above his head, which could only be used to exit but not to enter. If he was attacked from all sides, the Yang spirit could escape through this hole, but it was impossible for outsiders to use the Yang spirit to sneak in and attack him quietly. In this grotto, there was also a very deep pit on the ground, which had been dug by Zhang Yuan in order to refine the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade. It was not only densely covered with magic circles, but also piled up with corpses and medicine dregs. The yin qi was so strong that it was like hell. Zhang Yuan had spent a lot of money and time on this cultivation mansion. It was an excellent cultivation treasure land. Not only did it seize the magical creation of heaven and earth, but it was also a unique and ingenious place. When cultivators cultivated in this grotto, there was a cave leading to the sky above their heads and a deep pit of yin qi under their feet. It could be said that it was connected to the 9th heaven and the 9th earth. In a breath, they could collect the yin and yang qi of heaven and earth. The yin-yang sect was a big cultivation sect in the Chinese cultivation world since ancient times. Its origin was extremely ancient and could even be traced back to the Yellow Emperor himself. When the Yellow Emperor asked Qi Bo about the cultivation method, Qi Bo asked him to teach the Yellow Emperor the art of yin and yang. This was the origin of the yin-yang sect. The cultivators of the yin-yang sect had a doctrine and an unswerving concept of cultivation, which was that the reason why mortals were weak was that they were injured by the intersection of yin and yang. This meant that the reason why ordinary people were getting weaker was that they were injured by improper behavior in the intercourse of yin and yang. Therefore, the yin-yang sect took this as their fundamental doctrine and proposed that the reason why the saints were strong was because of the intersection of yin and yang. Although only a few words were changed, the meaning was completely different. The cultivators of the yin-yang sect believed that since ordinary people did not know the art of plucking, they would behave improperly during intercourse, resulting in injuries to the kidneys, body, and mind. In the end, their essence, qi, and spirit would be depleted. Quantitative change would lead to qualitative change, and the strong would slowly become weak. Then, the sages who knew how to cultivate could use the correct method to pluck the yin and yang during intercourse. So what is the right way? Zhang Ding, a Taoist priest of the yin-yang sect in the Tang dynasty, had written a cultivation classic called Dong Xianzi that had been passed down through the ages. This book was another classic of the Yin Yang sect after the 8 trigram scripture, and it was still regarded as a supreme classic by the Yin Yang sect. In this ancient book, it was stated that of all things in the world, only man is the most precious. A man's desire is the most important thing. Lawful embodiment of heaven and earth, yin and yang. Those who understood the truth would nourish their nature and prolong their life. Those who were slow would harm the life of heaven and earth. It meant that sexual intercourse should follow the laws of heaven and earth, and follow the principles of yin and yang. Only then could one prolong life and strengthen one's foundation. This kind of cultivation method was originally the truth of the world, and it was human nature. The Yin-Yang sect used to be strong for a time, but as a big tree has withered branches, during the Wei, Jin and Northern and Southern dynasties, the Yin-Yang sect once bewitched the foolish people in the countryside, and raped them. For a time, the heavens were angry and the people resented them. The cultivation world rose up to attack them. Then, during the Taiwu emperor of the Northern Wei dynasty, the Northern Celestial Master Taoist Xueqi initiated a reform of Taoism. He publicly abolished the sexual techniques of Taoism, and listed this cultivation method as forbidden. Anyone who cultivates this technique will be attacked by the whole world. After that, the Yin-Yang sect declined greatly. It was not until the Tang dynasty that the Tang people opened up and the Yin-Yang sect rose again. Only then did Zhang Ding write a book and publicize the way of yin and yang with the book Dong Xianzi. For a time, the Yin-Yang sect was popular from the nobles and ministers to the common people. But unfortunately, at this time, the Fox Zen school rose. This group of fox spirits learned the Yin-Yang technique, which was really like adding wings to a tiger. They became more and more evil. Many cultivators couldn't control the word lust. They lost their essence and lost their vitality, fattening the cultivation of a group of fox spirits, and they themselves became medicine dregs. Such behavior of the Fox Zen school naturally angered the cultivation world. Especially after the appearance of the mystical silver fox, the Yin-Yang sect also took a lot of blame. After the cultivators of the cultivation world drove away the mystical silver fox, they turned around and launched a counterattack against the Yin-Yang sect, killing many masters of the Yin-Yang sect. After the Tang dynasty, the Yin-Yang sect could not recover until the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties. First, the Zhangyi school unified Jianghu, and then the Quanzhen sect rose. There was no place for the Yin-Yang sect in the cultivation world. Today, this super sect, which used to be where there were people, there were cultivators of the Yin-Yang sect, had been reduced to a small sect struggling at death's door. Although Zhang Yuan was old, he had always been ambitious and had always been eager to revitalize the Yin-Yang sect. Therefore, he had been running this bleak sect. After decades of accumulation and development, he had dozens of disciples, had his own immortal mansion, and even refined the extremely domineering Hel Wuzhong enchanting jade. But all of this, with Ding Nan's killing of her master and seizing the position, everything had become a bubble. This was a great misfortune for Zhang Yuan, but it was a great blessing for an extremely ancient cultivation sect like the Yin-Yang sect. Although Ding Nan was a half-baked cultivator, she was extremely intelligent, and her intelligence was no less than that of Zhou Qin. Ding Nan took over as the leader and quickly eradicated the dissidents. After taking control of the sect's power, she immediately abolished the way of yin-yang double cultivation, which was criticized by her colleagues in the cultivation world. In fact, the reason why Ding Nan abolished the way of yin-yang double cultivation was very simple. Because she was a virgin, she couldn't stand this way of cultivation. Moreover, she was a proud and arrogant woman. Except for Li Yundong, if Li Yundong asked her to have sex with him, she would naturally be willing. But she didn't care about other people at all. How could she be willing to give her virginity to other stinky men? If they couldn't have sex, they naturally couldn't have sex with each other. But if the leader of the Yin-Yang sect didn't practice the way of yin-yang double cultivation, what was that? In desperation, Ding Nan had to learn from Ko Chenji's practice in Northern Wei. In front of the disciples of the sect, she pointed out that although the way of yin-yang double cultivation could greatly increase a cultivator's Xueqi, this kind of power came too fast and too light. Therefore, most of the cultivators of the Yin-Yang sect were frivolous and exaggerated, and the Niden in their bodies was not strong enough. When it encountered the Niden of thunder and fire that had been tempered by Li Yundong, it was really vulnerable. At the same time, Ding Nan announced that the way of yin-yang double cultivation was abolished and that she would re-establish the cultivation method of the yin-yang sect. As soon as this matter was announced, the yin-yang sect was in an uproar. Ding Nan had just taken office not long ago, but she was actually going to abolish the dogma left by the ancestors for 2,000 years? For a moment, there was a lot of discussion in the sect, and people's hearts were wavering. Although Ding Nan was skilled and had made them all obedient, many people still wanted to watch coldly from the sidelines, wanting to see what Ding Nan would do. At this time, Ding Nan was sitting cross-legged on a futon. Her eyes were closed, and her red lips were slightly parted. She slowly inhaled and exhaled. Every time she exhaled, a stream of white qi shot out like a sharp arrow. On the top of her head, the Bai Hui acupoint was opened, and a stream of white qi visible to the naked eye rose. This white qi went straight into the sky through the stone cave above her head. At the same time, a lighter white qi slowly descended from the stone cave, as if it was the qi of the 9 heavens that Ding Nan had drawn down herself. In the deep pit in front of her, there was a constant stream of dark qi coming out of the ground, as if she had drawn the yin qi of the 9 heavens from the 9 heavens. These two auras continuously drilled into Ding Nan's body and soon gathered together. The crowd saw that Ding Nan's body was shrouded by a mass of white qi and a mass of black qi. These two masses of qi were entangled and tumbling as if they were fighting. But not long after, these two kinds of qi slowly condensed into one and turned into a huge yin and yang pattern, slowly flowing behind Ding Nan. Many cultivators of the yin-yang sect were sitting cross-legged beside Ding Nan, including Alba and Song Guohua, who was most trusted by Ding Nan. The two of them stared at Ding Nan with their eyes wide open, not daring to breathe too loudly. They all knew that they were Ding Nan's trusted subordinates. If Ding Nan broke her promise and her disciples rebelled, they would also be in trouble. Therefore, whether Ding Nan could create a brand new method of yin-yang double cultivation in public was a matter of great importance to their safety. Alba had only cultivated for a short time, so she could not see the clues of the qi on Ding Nan's body. She could be regarded as a layman watching the fun. However, Song Guohua had been with Zhang Yuan for a long time. He was a dabbler cultivator who could recite even if he could not compose poems, so he more or less knew something. At a glance, he could see that Ding Nan had integrated the yin and yang qi of the heaven and earth into one and could control it freely. In particular, her body was emitting a faint golden light, as if a golden body had appeared. This really made him so excited that he almost burst into tears. Although he was a bootlicker, who didn't want to have an awesome boss? Who didn't want their sect to be awesome one day? But now, Ding Nan let him see hope. It was the time when the spirit qi of heaven and earth was overflowing, and it was the best golden time for cultivation. The Mount Wuhua was clear and beautiful, and the mountains were like 5 dragons playing with pearls. It could be called a blessed land for dragons and tigers to achieve the Tao. Moreover, this grotto was a cultivation residence that Zhang Yuan had spent decades building. Ordinary people could not ask for it at all, so it could be said to be a favorable location. Ding Nan had absorbed the immortal qi of the Diyuan Jindan by chance when she was on the Chengdu peak of Mount Huangshan. Although she had cultivated for a short time, her body had already been recreated by the elixir. She was also intelligent and had a strong comprehension. She had long had the foundation and qualifications to soar into the sky. The combination of the right time, the right place, and the right people immediately created Ding Nan's amazing cultivation in the future. Although Ding Nan strictly prohibited and abolished the way of yin-yang dual cultivation between men and women, she carried forward the way of yin-yang dual cultivation between heaven and earth. She advocated collecting the yang qi of heaven and gathering the yin qi of earth, and placing the two qis in her own furnace to attack each other. She would then collect the yin to supplement the yang and strengthen herself. Although this cultivation method was not original, it was indeed the highest realm of yin-yang dual cultivation in the yin-yang sect. Although others understood the principle, they did not have the ability to cultivate it. Even Zhang Yuan could not do it, because he was not a body recreated by the elixir and could not stand the cultivation method of yin-yang dual cultivation between heaven and earth. But Ding Nan endured it and successfully broke through to the Jinshin phase. Although she could not directly place the yang spirit in the heavenly thunder to temper and absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth during the thunder retribution period, it was still possible to wet a small bath at the edge of the thunderclouds and take a small advantage. Ding Nan had successfully caught the last train of the thunder retribution, and also successfully shocked her subordinates. When she finished her cultivation, stood up, and opened her bright eyes, Everyone in the stone room had already prostrated themselves on the ground. In the past, they had shamelessly complimented Ding Nan and said, "Sect leader Wu Hua, your spiritual power is divine. You are the only one in the world." It was not that they did not feel disgusted, but in order to survive, they had to be thick-skinned and shout like this. But now, Ding Nan had convinced them all. At such a young age, she could easily reach the Jinshin phase with the highest cultivation method of the Yin-Yang sect. This was really shocking. Jinshin was a realm that every cultivator dreamed of. Cultivating to this realm meant that a cultivator had the admission ticket to the Thunder Retribution. Although the position after entering the realm might be different because of their different cultivation, they were still qualified to face the heavenly thunder. Being able to survive the Thunder Retribution meant that this cultivator had the hope of becoming an immortal or a sage. It meant that a sect could rely on this person's own strength to revitalize it and carry it forward. In the future, they would no longer have to look at the cultivators of the big sects such as the Zhangyi school and the Chuanjin school. Therefore this time, they were all sincerely convinced and shouted, "Sect leader Wu Hua, your spiritual power is divine. You are the only one in the world." At this moment, they all firmly believed that the cultivation world would undergo great changes because of their sect leader. Ding Nan was also looking at her hands at this time. She felt an unprecedented powerful force filling her body. This kind of power made her want to look up at the sky and laugh wildly. She knew that her cultivation had finally caught up. She finally had the qualifications to stand in front of Li Yundong and compete with him. She also finally had the strength to defeat Zhou Qin. "Li Yundong, I won't let you look down on me. You can hate me, curse me or hate me, but I won't let you look down on me and ignore me." Ding Nan suddenly clenched her fists, her eyes shining with ambition and excitement. "Li Yundong, I won't let you look down on me. I'm going to give you a big surprise. And Zhou Qin, just you wait. Ding Nan, am coming. The Great Flood is coming. When I write the Great Flood, I will make up for the previous chapter." Chapter 826. Time passed by quickly. After the Spring Festival, the land of China quickly welcomed the two solar terms of spring and rain. After the Spring Festival, it meant that the lifeless winter had passed and the spring season, which was full of vitality, had arrived. There was an agricultural proverb in the central part of China. It said, "A moment of spring is worth 1,000 pieces of gold." This saying was also common to cultivators. Although the spring thunder had not yet begun, many cultivators were already looking forward to it and began to prepare for the lightning tribulation. Cultivators believed that the spring festival was divided into 3 phases. The first phase was the arrival of the primordial bird, the second phase was the start of the thunder, and the third phase was the start of the lightning. Thunder was the power of heaven, and lightning was the power of the earth. Thunder without lightning was not suitable for the lightning tribulation, because there was only the power of heaven and not the power of the earth. It was impossible to combine yin and yang, and it was easy to be struck to death by the thunder. Therefore, only after the 3 phases were over would the thunder and lightning strike from the sky, which would make it much safer. After the Spring Festival, it was the start of the rain. In the guide to the 72 phases of the lunar order, it was said that in the middle of the first month, the element of wood began, but the one that gave birth to wood must be water. Therefore, after the Spring Festival came the rain. Cultivators also divided the rain into 3 phases. The first phase was when the otter sacrificed the fish, the second phase was when the swan goose came, and the third phase was when the vegetation grew. In the third phase, the spring wind sneaked into the night and quietly moistened everything. Everything had begun to grow, and the vigorous rain from the sky moistened the earth. Therefore, the chi of heaven and earth merged and overflowed with spiritual energy. At this time, the thunder was ready to strike, and the awakening of insects came unexpectedly. In the guide to the 72 phases of the lunar order, it was said that in the second month, all things came out of the earthquake, and the earthquake became thunder, so it was called the awakening of insects. At this time, the thunder was not as weak as the thunder during the Spring Festival, and its vitality was weak. The thunder at this time was astonishing, and each thunder was full of the power of heaven. Therefore, it could awaken the insects and beasts buried deep in the earth. At this time, on Mount Longhu rumble, a bolt of lightning streaked across the sky. The sound of thunder rolled like a torrent, coming from the distant horizon and quickly moving to the far end of the horizon. In a small Taoist temple on a side peak of Mount Longhu, Zhang Lufang was squatting in front of a low and shabby stone step in front of the Taoist temple. She was supporting her head with both hands and looking up at the dense dark clouds in the sky. Lightning was constantly flashing and rolling in the clouds, and the edges of the clouds were illuminated by the white light from time to time. In the black roof in front of her, the rain was like a broken string of pearls, dripping down in a string, splashing in front of the stone steps, drenching her tube, but she herself did not notice it. Senior sister. Senior sister. Suddenly, a male voice with a strange accent came out from the thunder. It was Hardadef, who was cultivating in Mount Longhu. Since Hardadef had already become a disciple of Zhang Kongyun, according to the management of the cultivation world, foreigners who entered the cultivation world to cultivate must take a Chinese name. Therefore, Hardadef took the name he got from Li Yundong. Li Senator when Hardadef said the name himself, Zhang Kongyun and Zhang Lufang were surprised for a while. But after hearing that it was Li Yundong who gave the name, they did not say anything. He had chosen the right name. Hardadef was a person who lacked wood in the 5 elements. The name Li Sen only had 2 characters, but there were 4 wood in it, so it must be suitable for the occasion. When Zhang Lufang heard Hardadef calling her, she turned her head and saw that Hardadef, no, Li Sen was wearing a short, tight Taoist robe and a low Taoist crown on his head. When he walked, he was in a hurry. From time to time, his feet were caught by the Taoist robe, and he could not move his feet. He was like a woman who was wearing a miniskirt and did not like it. He walked crookedly, which was very awkward and funny. Li Sen was a burly man. A typical Western burly man. Most of the cultivators on Mount Longhu were of medium build and were short. Especially Zhang Kongyun himself, who was a thin and shriveled old man. How could he have a loose and fitting Taoist robe? Zhang Kongyun had to find a Taoist robe given to him by the sect and give it to Li Senator. He asked him to make do with it first, and then he would make a new one for Li Senator. However, at this time, the Zhengyi school was busy both inside and outside. They had to prevent the Xiantian sect from seizing power, prepare for the Thunder Tribulation, and prepare to deal with the mystical silver fox. Any one of these 3 things was a big deal. Only a big sect like the Zhengyi school could carry out these 3 things at the same time. If other sects wanted to do these 3 things at the same time, they would have to do it in a complicated way. At this time, everyone in the Zhengyi school was so busy that they were kicking the back of their heads with their heels. Each of these 3 things was related to the survival of the sect. Who had time to pay attention to Li Sen, a blonde and blue-eyed foreigner? What's more, it was just a small matter of changing a Taoist robe. Therefore, Li Sen's matter had been delayed. He walked like a palace girl in a cheongsam and wooden clogs who had just entered the palace in the Qing dynasty. When Zhang Lufang saw Li Sen's appearance, she couldn't help but burst out laughing. She said with a smile, "Blockhead, why are you in such a hurry?" Before she could finish her sentence, she saw Li Sen suddenly stumble. His body slanted and he fell face first onto the ground. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and supported himself with both hands. He didn't suffer any injuries, but his expression and posture were very funny. Zhang Lufang laughed, raised her hand slightly, and said with a smile, "Shirdi, you don't have to be so polite. Haven't I already given you a red packet? Why are you still kowtowing? Do you want more red packets? Hee, let me tell you, there's no way to do that. The landlord doesn't have any extra money." Li Sen got up awkwardly and patted the dirt on his body with both hands. As he pulled at his tight Taoist robe, he muttered in annoyance, "Damn it, why is this robe so strong? It won't break even if I fall." He originally wanted to tear the bottom of the Taoist robe to make it easier for him to walk, but no matter how strong he was, the Taoist robe did not move at all. Zhang Lufang smiled and told him that this was a Taoist robe specially designed for newcomers to practice. It was extremely strong and even had a certain degree of resistance to blows and swords. Other sects would not have such benefits, so he didn't have to be picky. Li Sen gave up the idea of transforming the Taoist robe, and began the painful process of falling every day. He soon became the object of Zhang Liufang's daily teasing. Because his name had a lot of mu in it, and sometimes he looked a little dull, Zhang Lufang called him Blockhead and Blockhead. Blockhead, Li said awkwardly, "Shiji, I don't want a red packet. I just want to ask you, what is the gathering of 3 flowers at one's prominence? Were they wearing 3 flowers on his head? Master is not here, so I don't understand a lot of things." As he said that, he took out a thread-bound book from behind him and looked at Zhang Lufang like a curious baby. Zhang Lufeng patted her forehead and painfully said, 3 flowers on the head? Oh my god, you can really think. What is the 5 cheese collecting in mind? The 5 cheese collecting in renminbi? Dollars? You don't even know this. You are really a blank piece of paper. Although Zhang Lufeng made fun of Blockheadly every day, Blockheadly pestered Zhang Lufeng every day and asked her some very basic questions. Although these questions were no less than doctoral-level questions for a foreigner like him, for a cultivator like Zhang Lufeng, they were simply addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division for a junior student. She actually had to answer him every day. At first, she could teach him with great interest, but Blockheadly's foundation was too poor. She had to explain a very simple thing to him for a long time, and sometimes even when she was sweating profusely, he was still at a loss, which made Zhang Lufeng so angry that she wanted to strangle this stupid blockhead to death. After a long time, Zhang Lufeng felt pain when she saw Blockheadly ask such questions. Blockheadly looked at Zhang Lufeng with a silly smile. He didn't know that his Xueqi was annoyed by him asking such questions. He was like a child looking at a famous teacher, full of expectation. Zhang Kongyun was now in seclusion, preparing for the thunder retribution. It would be difficult for Zhang Lufeng to refuse even if she wanted to, but she didn't want to talk to this blockhead for a long time. Just as she was having a headache, she suddenly thought of something and said with a smile, "Do you want to know what it means to gather 3 flowers in acupoint? Come on, I'll take you to see my eldest Xueqi. She will tell you." Zhang Lufeng, on the other hand, was thinking of a plan to divert the trouble and throw this guy to someone else to bother. Li Sen didn't know that Zhang Lufeng disliked him and wanted to dump him. He nodded with a smile on his face and said, "Okay, eldest Xueqi is very powerful. She must know." Li Sen had also seen Zhou Ping from a distance. He only felt that this eldest Xueqi was not only beautiful, but also strict. She must be a very powerful person. Zhang Lufeng muttered in her heart, "She is not as powerful as me, but, humph, if you annoy her later, she will teach you a lesson for me. No matter what, I am your Xueqi. It's not easy to deal with her. Later, eldest Xueqi will do it for me, he." She made up her mind, got up, found a bamboo umbrella, and said, "Let's go, blockhead." After saying that, she walked towards the rain gracefully. Li Sen hurriedly put away the book, found a bamboo umbrella, and chased after her, shouting, "Xueqi, wait for me." The two of them walked slowly along the mountain path of Mount Longhu in the early spring rain. After about half an hour, Zhang Lufeng arrived at the Taoist master's mansion on the main peak. Although the weather was not good, the Taoist master's mansion was still full of incense and pilgrims. Zhang Lufeng found a young Taoist priest and shouted in a crisp voice, "Hey, Xixiang, where is eldest Xueqi? Isn't she on duty today?" Although there were many female Taoist priests in the Zhengyi school, Zhang Lufeng was one of the most outstanding ones. Many of the male cultivators of the younger generation were in love with her. When the young Taoist priest saw Zhang Lufeng, he immediately smiled eagerly and said, "It's you, Shimmy. Eldest Xueqi is not on duty today. It seems that she has gone to cultivate in seclusion with eldest uncle." In the Zhengyi school, Zhang Ling's seniority was the highest, and Zhou Ping was her eldest disciple. Therefore, everyone knew that she was referring to Zhou Ping. Among the older generation, Zhang Kongyun's seniority was only higher than Wang Yuanshan's. The rest of them had to call everyone Xueqi or Xixiang. Zhang Lufeng was his disciple, so her seniority was also very low. As soon as Zhang Lufeng was mentioned, everyone knew that she was referring to Zhang Lufeng. When Zhang Lufeng heard that Zhou Ping had gone into seclusion, she suddenly looked resentful and disappointed. When will she come out of seclusion? When she asked this question, she felt a little silly. She must have come out after the thunder retribution period. The young Taoist priest laughed and said, "I don't know. Why are you looking for eldest Xueqi?" Zhang Lufeng quickly waved her hand and said, Nothing. As she said this, she turned around and whispered with a sad face, "What should we do? Who can we find to lead this trouble to her?" Muta Li, who was standing to one side, heard her muttering and hurriedly came over. "Xueqi, what did you say?" Zhang Lufeng was shocked, but soon she thought of something. She clapped her hands and asked, "By the way, where is Xixiang Tianhe?" Zhang Lufeng was talking about Zhang Tianhe, who had once been the pride of the Zhengyi school. After being beaten down by Li Yunyang and Shunxiu, he had finally lost all his arrogance and started to cultivate honestly. Not only did Zhang Tianhe have a high seniority, but he was also the direct descendant of Master Zhang. Wherever he went, people looked up to him, so he developed a bad habit of looking down on the top of his head. He was originally talented, and his understanding of cultivation was quite good. Therefore, when he focused on cultivation, he really made tremendous progress. He could still be called the leader of the younger generation of the Zhengyi school. When the young Taoist priest heard her ask about Zhang Tianhe, he felt a little embarrassed and hesitated. Zhang Lufeng asked curiously, "What's wrong? Is it inconvenient for you to say it?" "Forget it." After that, she waved her hand and said, "Then I'll go first." It was rare for the young Taoist priest to say a few words to this beautiful and playful junior sister. Seeing that she was about to leave, he quickly said, "Hey, junior sister, don't be in such a hurry. I didn't say it was inconvenient." After that, he moved closer to Zhang Lufeng, lowered his voice, and said, "Xixiang Tianhe is now at the side peak. You can find him there, but don't tell him that I said it." As he spoke, the young Taoist pointed to a mountain in the distance. Zhang Lufeng looked over and was stunned. "Strange, isn't this the peak of Shishu Wang Yuanshan? Why is Xixiang Tianhe here?" But she didn't think too much about it. She quickly walked toward the side peak. As she walked, she turned around and waved. "Thank you." Li Sen also quickly followed behind and shouted, "Senior sister, wait for me." His voice was so loud that the pilgrims next to him looked at him in surprise. Especially when they saw that he was a foreigner with blonde hair and blue eyes. Their eyes widened even more. The young Taoist priest raised his head and watched Zhang Liufeng's pretty figure disappear from his sight. After a moment of loss, he obediently returned to his position. Zhang Lufeng quickly took Li Sen to the side peak where the Linggong sect was located. As soon as they reached the foot of the mountain, Zhang Lufeng suddenly felt a sharp sword qi piercing through the air and fiercely stabbing toward her. Chapter 827. The sword qi was so fierce that Zhang Lufeng didn't expect that she would be attacked in the territory of Mount Longhu. She was so scared that she almost couldn't react. But very quickly, this sword qi swiftly flashed past Zhang Liufeng's side, chopping down on the hard stone steps of the mountain path, cleaving open a crack on the blue stone pavement. Mutali stared blankly, his mouth unable to close for a long time. "How dare you trespass the forbidden area of Mount Longhu?" A rough voice rang out like thunder, and soon a fierce-looking Taoist priest appeared in front of them like a ghost. Zhang Lufeng took a closer look and found that she didn't know the Taoist priest. She stammered, Who are you?" "I'm not an outsider, I'm... Before she could finish speaking, the Taoist priest suddenly laughed and said, "Oh, it's you, Xueqi. How is your master? He's about to undergo the lightning tribulation, isn't he?" Zhang Lufeng asked curiously, "You know my master?" The Taoist priest laughed and said, "When I met your master, you weren't even born." Zhang Lufeng blinked her eyes and giggled. "So you're my Sherbwa? How should I address you, Sherbwa?" The Taoist priest smiled and said, "You can call me Immortal Ling Hua." "Xueqi, what are you doing here? Didn't your master tell you that this place has been sealed?" Zhang Lufeng shook her head blankly. "I don't know. Why is it sealed?" Immortal Ling Hua smiled and said, "It's none of your business. Tell me, what are you doing here? If there's nothing else, leave quickly." Zhang Lufeng said, "Is Xixiang Tianhe here? I have something to talk to him about." Immortal Ling Hua thought for a moment and said, "Zhang Tianhe? Ha! How do you know he's here?" Zhang Lufeng giggled and said, "I can calculate with my fingers 500 years in the future and 5,000 years in the past." Seeing her naughty look, Immortal Ling Hua couldn't help laughing. "You little girl, you were naughty when you were young, and you're still like that when you grow up. Well, I won't ask. He's in the cave halfway up the mountain. You can go in and find him yourself." Zhang Lufeng was overjoyed. "Thank you, Sherbwa." Then she waved her hand and said to Li Sen, who was a little nervous, "Let's go, blockhead." Immortal Ling Hua's face suddenly darkened. "Wait, he can't go in." Zhang Lufeng immediately said anxiously, "Uncle Ling Hua, he's also a disciple of our Zhengyi school. Why can't he enter?" Reverend Spirit Flame's face was ashen as he said, "Those who are not of our race must have a different heart." Immortal Ling Hua's face was livid. Zhang Lufang was a little angry, but her face was full of pleading. She said pitifully, "Uncle Ling Hua, he is my master's disciple and also my junior brother. You won't disrespect my master and your poor martial nephew, right? I Xixiang Tianhe Qt go in." Tyant, he, Li Sei, Shan, I said. Zhang Lufang was beautiful and very popular, so Reverend Spirit Flame hesitated for a moment before sinking into contemplation. Seeing this, Zhang Lufang suddenly pulled Li Sen and said, "Blockhead, run." Then she pulled Li Sen and ran inside. Immortal Ling Hua was so angry that he couldn't help shouting, "Stop!" Zhang Lufang turned back and made a face at him. She said with a smile, "Thank you, Immortal Ling Hua. I'll treat you to dinner later." Immortal Ling Hua couldn't help but laugh and shake his head. This little girl. The corners of his eyes were full of love for the younger generation. Zhang Lufang barged in with Li Senator. She laughed all the way until she was out of breath. Her heart was filled with the pride of having done something bad. After a while, she arrived at the mountainside. She looked around and suddenly found a place overflowing with spiritual qi and sword qi soaring into the sky. Her heart moved and she walked towards that place. The side peak where the Linggong sect was located was extremely large. It could be said that two peaks were connected. One was the peak where the Taoist temple of the Linggong sect was located. The fierce battle between the Chinese cultivation world and the Japanese cultivation world took place on this peak. The other peak next to it was the peak where the Fengchen stone imprisoned Wang Yuanshan. Right now, Zhang Lufang was heading towards the mountain peak where Wang Yuanshan was imprisoned. She led Li Sen for a while, and sure enough, halfway up the mountain, they walked along the mountain path for a while. Suddenly, the willows darkened and the flowers brightened. In front of them was a huge stone cave. At the entrance of the cave stood two Taoists in their 30s. When they saw Zhang Lufang and Li Sen, they sternly shouted, "Who is it?" Zhang Lufang quickly said, "It's me, Zhang Lufang." The two Taoist priests immediately relaxed their vigilance and laughed. "It's junior martial sister." As they spoke, they looked at Li Sen in surprise, as if they did not understand why he was here. Zhang Lufang smiled and said, "I'm looking for Tianhe Xixiang. Is he here?" The two Taoist priests asked curiously, "How do you know Zhang Tianhe is here?" Zhang Lufang rolled her eyes and said, "Uncle Ling Hua told me." The two Taoist priests suddenly understood. One of them smiled and said, "So that's how it is. He is indeed here. Do you want me to call him?" As soon as the man finished speaking, Zhang Tianhe's voice was heard softly. "No, I'm here." As he spoke, a man of medium height walked out of the stone cave. He was handsome and had a smile on his face. The arrogance between his eyebrows had completely disappeared, replaced by humility and peace. Zhang Tianhe carried a 3-foot-long sword on his back. It was the 7-star sword, one of the 5 famous swords of Taoism. When Zhang Tianhe saw Zhang Lufang, he smiled slightly and said very politely, "Little sister, what can I do for you?" As he spoke, he saw Li Sen beside him, but he did not have the strong hostility of the others. He smiled slightly and saluted. "Zhenren Li Sen, you have time to come today. What a rare guest." After Zhang Tianhe came back from the Taoist assembly, he had witnessed Li Yunyang defeat several masters of the Japanese cultivation world on his own at Mount Longhu. He was extremely shocked and seemed to have changed into a different person. Although he used to treat people kindly, he always exuded a condescending arrogance. But at this time, Zhang Tianhe's politeness and easygoing attitude came from the bottom of his heart, making people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Zhang Lufang saw this and thought to herself, "Xixiang Tianhe suffered a series of defeats before, and I was worried that he would not be able to recover, but I didn't expect him to be a direct descendant of the Celestial Master. He was able to rise from the ashes and pull himself together. His cultivation is far better than before." Zhang Lufang saw that Zhang Tianhe was extremely amiable at this moment, as if he was not angry at all. She quickly realized something. That's not right. If senior brother Tianhe was so amiable and polite, then he wouldn't have taught this blockhead a lesson. Doesn't that mean my plan has failed? Zhang Lufang rolled her eyes and said with a smile, "Actually, it's nothing. I just miss Xixiang Tianhe, so I came to play with him. Can't I?" As she said this, She took Zhang Tianhe's arm very affectionately and shook it gently. Zhang Tianhe laughed and said, "Yes, of course, but it's a little inconvenient now." Zhang Lufeng asked curiously, "What's inconvenient about it? By the way, what are you guys doing here so mysteriously?" Zhang Tianhe hesitated for a moment, and Zhang Lufeng said with a smile, "Oh, I'm hiding it from you." "No way. I'm not an outsider. What treasures are hidden in this stone cave? Take me in to have a look." Zhang Tianhe thought for a moment and said with a smile, "Well, Xixiang, you're a guest from afar. Come in and have a seat." At this time, the two Taoist priests who were guarding the cave immediately blurted out, "Isn't that a little inappropriate?" Zhang Tianhe smiled and said, "Xixiang Lufeng is a direct descendant of our Zhengyi school, and Li Sen is also a person who admires the teachings of our sect. What's wrong with that? I'm just taking them in to have a look." Zhang Tianhe was recognized as the next successor of Celestial Master Zhang in the Zhengyi school. As soon as he said this, the two Taoist priests kept silent. Zhang Lufeng was overjoyed. She turned her head and said to Li Sen with a smile, "Let's go, blockhead. Let's go in and see what these guys are up to." The two of them followed Zhang Tianhe into the stone cave. At first, the entrance to the stone cave was quite large, but the further they went, the narrower it became. Gradually, both sides could only accommodate one person. There was no light in the depths of the stone cave. It was almost impossible to see one's fingers in front of them. Zhang Tianhe walked in front of them. No one saw him move, but the sword on his back automatically flew out, buzzing and emitting a white light, illuminating the path under their feet. Zhang Lufeng had seen the seven-star sword before, so she didn't think it was strange. However, Li Sen's eyes were fixed on it, and his eyes were filled with envy. Zhang Lufeng saw his expression and was secretly moved. She was about to speak when she suddenly heard Zhang Tianhe say, "Be careful." As he spoke, he suddenly stopped in his tracks and turned around to greet the two of them. Then, he leaped and disappeared from where he stood. Only the seven-star sword was still floating in the air, illuminating the way for them like a searchlight. Zhang Lufeng took a closer look and saw that there was a huge grotto in front of her. It was the size of 3 football fields, and the road under her feet had been cut off. There was a high platform more than 3 meters high, and there were all kinds of talismans drawn onto the platform. It must be a huge formation. Zhang Lufeng was shocked. She looked up and saw that not only were the ground full of talismans, but the stone walls around the grotto were also covered with dense talisman marks. At the top of the grotto, she could faintly see a small hole, through which a faint light was shining. Like Zi Yuan, Zhang Lufeng was an inner disciple who had been cultivating since childhood. She knew a lot of cultivation knowledge, but she had never seen such a large formation. What is this?" Zhang Lufeng was stunned and stammered. Zhang Tianhe smiled slightly and said, "Sister Shimmy, just take a look. There's no need to talk about it, or there will be trouble." Zhang Liufeng's heart trembled. She jumped down from the high platform, stepped on the formation, and looked at each of the talisman marks in awe. Zhang Tianhe looked up at Li Sen, only to find that he didn't look at the formation at all. His eyes were fixed on his seven-star sword, and his eyes were full of curiosity and love. He couldn't help but look at Zhang Lufeng, then said with a smile, "Do you want to give it a try?" At first, Li Sen didn't realize that Zhang Tianhe was talking to him, so he was at a loss. When Zhang Tianhe said it again, Zhang Lufeng shouted, "Hey, blockhead, I'm talking to you." Li Sen seemed to wake up from a dream and said blankly, "Ah? What?" Although Zhang Tianhe was also a cultivator, he was young and didn't have the deep xenophobia of older cultivators. He smiled at Li Sen and said, "Do you want to give it a try?" As he said this, he controlled the seven-star sword to float in front of Li Senator. Li Sen couldn't believe his ears. He stared at the glowing seven-star sword in front of him in surprise and said, Can I try?" Zhang Lufeng pursed her lips and said with a smile, "Blockhead, I asked you to try. Just do it." Li Sen gathered his courage and stretched out his hand to grab the seven-star treasured sword. However, he suddenly felt a huge force coming towards him. It was as if he was riding on a wild horse that was carrying him and leaping out. When the seven-star treasured sword felt that someone else was holding on to it, it immediately began to struggle frantically. In an instant, it brought Li Sen into midair and jolted him like a wild horse. In the blink of an eye, Li Sen was shaken down from midair.
Li Sen let out a blood-curdling scream. Just as he was about to break his tendons and break his bones, Zhang Tianhe reacted quickly and pulled him back, allowing him to regain his balance and land on his feet. Zhang Tianhe smiled apologetically and said, "Sorry, I was careless." As he said this, he waved the seven-star sword with one hand, then pointed his finger and said, "Tut!" The seven-star sword suddenly froze in the air. It no longer made a buzzing sound or trembled. Zhang Tianhe smiled and said, "Zhenren Li Sen, why don't you try again?" Li Mutu was so scared just now that he didn't dare to try again. He looked timid. Zhang Lufang, who was next to him, saw his timid look and was so angry that she kicked his leg. "I asked you to try, so just try. What are you afraid of?"
Only then did Li Sen dare to reach out and gently hold the hilt of the sword.
This time, the seven-star treasured sword did not struggle anymore. It was like an ordinary treasured sword. Li Sen tried waving it a few times, as if he was a child who had obtained a treasure. He waved his hands and feet, gesticulating. Zhang Lufang giggled, while Zhang Tianhe looked at him with a smile. Just as he was about to speak, they suddenly heard a loud rumble coming from outside. The sound was so loud that it shook the two people in the stone cave. Zhang Lufang exclaimed, "What a frightening heavenly thunder! Is someone going through a lightning tribulation?" The power of heavenly thunder would only be fully displayed when someone was going through a lightning tribulation. Zhang Lufang and Zhang Tianhe looked at each other and said in unison, "Let's go and take a look." The two of them leaped and ran outside. Zhang Tianhe was the fastest, and he disappeared in an instant. Li Sen, on the other hand, didn't seem to notice as he continued to swing his seven-star treasure sword. Zhang Lufang jumped onto the high platform and found that Li Sen was still waving the sword. She couldn't help but laugh and say, "Hey Muta, let's go. Stop playing." Li Sen reluctantly stroked the seven-star treasured sword with his finger. He responded and quickly ran toward Zhang Lufang. But at this time, he was a little anxious and unconsciously took a big step forward. Immediately, the Taoist robe under his feet pulled at his feet, causing him to stumble and fall forward.
Li Sen's eyes and hands were quick. He stabbed the seven-star sword into the ground, and with a clanging sound, he used the sword as a support to stabilize himself.
Zhang Lufang was scared and shouted, "Hey, are you okay?" Li Sen was also scared and turned pale.
He stammered, I'm fine."
He pulled the seven-star sword out of the ground. After he climbed up the high platform, he smiled at Zhang Lufang embarrassedly and handed the sword to her. Zhang Lufang didn't take it. She just rolled her eyes and said, "You can even fall like this? I really admire you.
Let's go, we shouldn't stay here any longer."
As she spoke, she muttered to herself along the way and quickly left with Li Senator. However, none of them knew that when Li Sen used the seven-star sword to support his body, the extremely sharp blade of the seven-star sword had broken a rune on the giant magic array. It was this crack that was less than an inch long that had caused a great disaster. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.